Hello, dear viewers. Support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it. And also, make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video. Later that afternoon, thanks to some healing liquids Elrond had given Gandalf, healed the wounds on Harry's stag body. The liquid strangely had almost the same healing properties of phoenix tears, and Harry was feeling as well as he ever did. Pippin held the pouch up to the stag's head, and the animal dipped his entire nose and mouth into the bag. "Hope he doesn't try to eat anything," said Pippin to Merry. Suddenly a flash of white light, and Harry was back to his original form. "Note to self, desperate acts aren't good enough anymore," said Harry, falling back against a rock. "Gotta think before I act." "But you did beautifully," said Strider with a kind smile. "You hid yourself from Saruman's spies and even destroyed quite a few." "You're just kidding, the boy. He could have destroyed everything," snarled Boromir. Harry sighed. "He's right, I could have ruined it all. On a side note, remind me not to use that, unless I'm really, really desperate," said Harry. "That hurt. When do we leave for the mountain?" "We leave now and go as far as we can, and if you can make it, with those spies, one might have seen one of us. It is best to beat the birds to Saruman and get over the mountain," said Gandalf. "Though at the speed they fly, it might just be a pale dream." "Let's go then," said Harry. "All right, but you tell us when you need to rest a bit," said Strider sternly, making Harry promise. They traveled for the rest of the day, climbing the shimmering, snow-covered slope. They stopped once because Frodo had lost his footing and fell right into Strider's knees, who was traveling all the way in the back. Harry watched as Strider helped, picked Frodo up off of the snow-covered ground. Frodo gripped his throat, and a slightly panicked look came into his eyes. Harry reached into his pouch and was about to grab a hold of the amethyst jewel to help Frodo clear some of the snow away and find the ring. But he stopped when he saw Boromir lift the ring by the chain out of the snow. "Strange how such a small thing," said Boromir, gazing longingly at the ring. "Boromir, give the ring back to Frodo," said Strider sternly. Harry dropped the amethyst and reached for his sword, ready to defend Frodo, but Boromir slowly handed the ring back to Frodo, who snatched it immediately. "I care not," said Boromir with a dry chuckle. "Bull," thought Harry to himself. After Boromir ruffled Frodo's hair and swung his shield back on his back, Harry eased the tension on his sword, and he noticed Strider did the same thing. They continued their freezing cold journey until they finally found the remains of a path perched precariously on the edge of the cliff. The path of Cara-Duras wasn't always this close to the edge. There used to be a good 40 feet away from the side of the cliff, said Gandalf quietly to Harry. "What happened to it?" asked Harry. "Time has finally come to the path and has caused it to steadily erode away down the mountain," said Gandalf. "Now, only the wolves of Cara-Duras take this route. Chances are that we're going to meet up with one of them? Better than average?" said Harry. "I'm afraid so," said Gandalf. He turned to face the setting sun. "We'd better find somewhere safe to rest for tonight." Legolas looked swiftly around, then pointed. "I see someplace up ahead." They trudged their way through the piling snow and made it to the spot Legolas had seen. It was a small indent in the rock, a cave that didn't go too far back but shielded them from the falling snow and the wind. They all huddled inside. There were no trees or sticks to make a fire from, but Harry had the solution. He took the amethyst out of his pouch and gave it a tight squeeze. Heat. Suddenly, the cave grew slowly warmer until the snow completely melted. "What's going on here?" said Boromir, looking around suspiciously. "Harry's heating the place up," said Merry. "How does..." said Boromir. Harry smiled warmly over to Boromir and said, "That's a secret." Boromir frowned slightly. "What sort of magic do you have?" "Like some apprentice wizards, they can vary," said Gandalf, quickly coming to Harry's rescue. Boromir looked at Harry skeptically, but decided to drop it. The hobbits gathered around Harry tightly, discovering it was warmer by him. "I'm hungry," said Pippin. "Here you go," said Sam, tossing each person a piece of bread and an apple. "I restocked the apples when Harry found them," said Sam with a smile. "Very wise," said Legolas, taking a bite of his own fruit. Suddenly, a howling sound came from out of the cave. "Well, if someone was bored, we're about to get some excitement," said Harry, standing up and unsheathing his blade. As everyone stood up and the hobbits were moved into the back, 3 wolves moved slowly into view. Their teeth were bared, and Harry could see the saliva dripping from its fangs and the steam coming from its breath. Strider moved forward and stood beside Harry, a savage smile on his lips. "Who wants to make the first move?" And as if in answer, one of the wolves lunged, its fangs ready to break and tear at the flesh at Harry's neck. With a quick swing of his sword, Harry sliced the head off of the wolf, making its way towards him. Strider handled the two that foolishly decided he was the easier target. Legolas shot his arrows between the two swordsmen and felled beast after beast that came within his sights. Gimli barged his way through the three of them and struck at any furry neck that reached him. Boromir and Gandalf kept the little ones back and struck down any of the wolves that were lucky to get past the front lines, but met with just as grisly an end. Soon, there were none left. Either they had scampered off out of fear for their own skins, or they had simply destroyed the entire pack. "Well, that wasn't too hard," said Pippin with a nervous smile. "We didn't help," said Merry. "There's more than one pack in these mountains," said Gimli. "I was afraid he'd say that," said Merry. So, Boromir took the first shift and kept a lookout for any more wolves. He watched out of the corner of his eye at the young man who was surrounded by the hobbits and sleeping gently against the wall of the cave. It was a strange feeling. He didn't want to trust the boy, but he couldn't help but feel the slightest hint of fondness for him. Why? He couldn't really figure out. That boy tried to make a fool of him at the council meeting, and that was it. He couldn't think of another reason to dislike him except that secret power he's been hiding. So far, he's seen the boy summon lightning and change his appearance slightly. Change his form into that of an animal, and heat the cave in which they were staying. What else can he do? Why won't he tell the rest of the company how he does it? Gandalf uses a staff. It's easy to see how he does it, but wait, if he is a wizard, where's his staff? He learned years ago that a wizard has no magical ability without his staff. Then how does this boy do it? So many questions and too few answers. That's why he dislikes the boy. The next morning, they climbed out of the cave and made their way steadily further up the mountain path. Sometimes they had to huddle close the rock wall in order to dodge the cascading snow and not get swept off the mountain entirely. Harry pushed his way forcefully through the waist-deep snow and saw with slight annoyance as Legolas tread light on top of the snow. He hadn't noticed it before, but there was no doubt that his feet had never sunk into the snow. "How can you do that?" shouted Harry over the blizzard. "I'm an elf," said Legolas, not shouting as loud as the rest of them had to do just to communicate. "Can't you melt the snow, boy?" asked Boromir from the back. "If I do, I have a bad feeling that we'll just get caught in an avalanche, or drown, whichever comes first," said Harry, shouting back to Boromir. Legolas walked a little further up the path and stopped at the turn in the path. He looked hard into the snowstorm. "There's a foul voice on the air," said Legolas. They all listened hard. They heard a deep voice mingling with the storm, as if commanding it do its will. "It's Saruman," shouted Gandalf. A waterfall of snow came down upon them, and they had to hug the wall of the cliff in order to escape from being pushed off. "He's trying to bring down the mountains," shouted Aragorn. "Gandalf, we must head back." "No," said Gandalf, stubbornly. Harry reached with his frozen fingers and took out the amethyst. He gripped the stone tightly and raised his hand. "Stop!" he bellowed. The snowstorm raged once more, but soon began to trickle down to gentle flurry. Harry's knees buckled slightly. "What's going on? Why am I so tired?" "You did it," said Merry happily, but immediately the storm picked up again. "I said stop!" shouted Harry. The storm slowed down once more. Finally, Harry fell to his knees. Gandalf rushed over to his side and dug him out of the snow. I don't understand," said Harry, his voice slightly weak. "Saruman is a powerful wizard. With him fighting you, you lose strength," said Gandalf, as quietly as he could. Then a greater shower of snow, bigger than the rest, that had been trying to bury them, fell down on top of them. This time, it succeeded in burying each member of the Fellowship. Slowly, arms and heads began to poke out of the snow and busy themselves trying to free themselves and each other. "We must get off the mountain, make for the Gap of Rohan, and head to my city," said Boromir, shouting over the storm that came back in full force. "The Gap of Rohan takes us too close to Isengard," shouted Aragorn, as he tried to pull Harry to his feet, who was almost completely unconscious. "If we cannot go over the mountain, let us go under it. Let us go through the mines of Moria," said Gimli sternly. Harry, come on!" "Wake up," said Strider, slapping his young friend's face. "So, weak?" said Harry weakly. "Gandalf, we must make a decision now!" "Before we lose Harry and the hobbits," said Strider. Gandalf looked as if a great decisive battle was going on behind his eyes. "So be it, we will go through the mines," said Gandalf. His voice held less than no hope. Going down the mountain was easier than going up. Strider tried to take the amethyst and will it with all he had to grow warm, but nothing happened. Only Harry can will it to work for another, said Gandalf as he hurried behind him, taking Harry's other shoulder, assisting in taking Harry down the slippery slopes. They walked well into the night until they reached a small woodland patch just off the mountain and made camp. Gimli built a large roaring fire to warm up the hobbits and try to revive Harry. He was still unconscious, but the color was coming back into his face as he rested beside the fire. "Will he be all right, Gandalf?" asked Pippin. "He should be all right by morning. He had to fight the head of my order, with little or no experience. It drained his strength. That was no natural storm. It was crafted by strong magic. We will head towards the walls of Moria in the morning," said Gandalf, as he draped his traveling cloak over the sleeping figure. Harry's body back at Grimmauld Place shivered horribly. Sirius ran to the hall cupboard and grabbed several blankets. He met Hermione on the landing. "I'm still not happy with you," said Hermione stiffly, as she stuck her nose in the air. "And you think I'm happy with you? You kids can come back and join me in sitting with Harry if you learn to keep the depressing thoughts to yourself," said Sirius, pushing past Hermione. "And shouldn't you be helping your parents cope with everything?" "Mr. Weasley is doing that. I just want to help," said Hermione, turning to face Sirius. "This is way beyond you kids. You just worry about your studies," said Sirius. "Ron and I have," said Hermione quickly. "Don't even start," snarled Sirius. "Now let me get back to Harry." "We want to see Harry," said Hermione. "Prove to me you can keep your mouth shut," said Sirius, as he walked into Harry's room. He dumped the 3 blankets on his chair and draped the heavier, fluffier blankets over top the shivering teen. The door then opened and the kids piled into the room. "What do you kids want?" asked Sirius, tucking the blankets in around Harry.
"Hermione said we could see Harry," said Ron.
"Did she also tell you that I said you could come in here if you learned to keep your mouth shut?" asked Sirius, turning around and facing them. Hermione shrunk back slightly. "Obviously not." "We're sorry for talking like we did," said Fred. "Can we please sit with Harry, too?" "Mum's not telling us anything on how he's doing," said George. "All right, but screw up, and I'll kick you out of here," said Sirius. "I've got no patience for anyone else but Harry." "So how is he doing?" asked Ginny, coming to the head of the bed and brushed Harry's constantly growing hair out of his eyes. "He feels a little chilly." "I know he just started shivering, and I went to get some blankets for him," said Sirius. "Why not just put up a warming charm in the bed?" said Hermione. "Strike one," said Sirius, pointing at her. "Dumbledore says that using magic around him is a bad idea. It could hurt him." "How could it?" said Hermione. "Strike two," said Sirius. "Hermione, drop it," hissed Ron. "I don't want to get kicked out again." "You wouldn't, she would," said Sirius. "Here you all are," said Remus, coming inside the room. "How's Harry today?" he asked, as he made to the other side of the bed, joining Ginny as he brushed his hair back. "He's cold today," said Sirius. "What are you writing down?" asked Remus, looking at the book beside the worn-looking man. "I've been keeping a record of everything that happens, so that if this happens to someone else, they'll know what to do." "Hopefully Harry will get better," said Sirius. "That's a good idea," said Remus. "Might avoid more ministry trouble." "I hope they catch that bitch," said George angrily. "Amen," said Remus, not bothering to scold the twin for his language. They all sat in reasonable silence and watched as Harry's shivering continued until it stopped suddenly, and then they watched his chest rise and fall slowly. The door opened again, and in came Mrs. Weasley and Dumbledore. "There you lot are," said Mrs. Weasley, sighing in relief. "Any news, Dumbledore?" asked Remus. "Dolores has vanished without a trace. Kingsley has volunteered to go and look for her, but I felt it is best if he stays here for a bit. He won't say it, but he's received an injury by taking 2 people by apparating," said Dumbledore with a slight smile. "How is he today?" His eyes misting slightly. "Cold," said Ginny. Dumbledore stepped out of the room and came back with a large blanket with a red and gold phoenix on it. "Here." Sirius took the blanket with a smile and tossed it lightly over the boy. "He's gonna get crushed with all these blankets," said Sirius with a smirk. "I still don't see why no one can use magic in here," said Hermione. "Out," said Sirius sternly. "I gave you 3 strikes. Now out." Hermione looked hurt but left the room. "You must give her some slack," said Dumbledore. "She is trying. He was her first friend at school." "I don't mean it the way you seem to take it," said Dumbledore, looking at Sirius's furious eyes. "I gave her 3 chances," said Sirius. "She's a logical thinker. She's not one for emotions and human complexity," said Dumbledore. "She can be quite cruel." I remember that, said Remus. Lavender Brown came crying to me once about her rabbit and Hermione trying to rationalize the death of her pet. Perhaps, instead of magical lessons, she needs to be taught some emotional knowledge, said Dumbledore. Umbridge was strapped to a chair with chains in the Malfoy manner and facing the most vile and dangerous man in the wizarding world. Are you ready to speak to me now? Said Voldemort with a slick smile. Umbridge nodded earnestly. I thought so. The Ministry is known for its cowardice, said Voldemort smoothly. Speak. Well, I had Potter thrown through a portrait. Draco can tell you he was there, said Umbridge earnestly. I am aware of that. What I want to know is, where is Potter? Now, his body, said Voldemort. I know of that painting. It cannot be removed from the castle, and it cannot be destroyed. But if I destroy Potter's body, silence his beating heart, then he will be trapped in that painting forever. As good as dead, stuck in the oils forevermore. I don't know where the Potter boy is. I've been looking for him for weeks, said Umbridge quickly. Then I suppose I have no use for you. Take her to your cellar dungeon. I shall have someone deal with her later, said Voldemort. I can tell you everything about the Ministry, said Umbridge, rushing to save her own skin. I have Lucius for that, said Voldemort with a sickening smile. Of what use would I have for you? I've already got the Minister of Magic in my pocket. Umbridge looked fearfully around, trying to think of something to save her, but Voldemort had stood up and walked out of the room, leaving her to the mercy of a masked Death Eater. They traveled as fast as they could down to the secret door of Moria. Gimli, though he didn't show it, he was getting quite eager to see his dwarf cousins. He was fingering his axe and telling Merry and Pippin about the great city beneath the mountains. Legolas wasn't all that keen on the idea. He kept stopping suddenly in the path and spent some time gazing longingly at the leaves clinging tightly to a tree. He muttered several times to himself that elves did not go underground. After Harry, who was thinking fondly of Sirius and the rest of them, crashed into Legolas as he stood at the base of a giant pine tree, he came up with an idea, though he wished it could have been found in a little less painful way. The next time they passed a maple tree, Harry scampered up the tree, like he was so fond of doing to his Hermione and Ron's favorite tree, on the school grounds. If they were annoying him too much, he'd go outside, climb the tree, and not come down until dinner time. He climbed to some of the greener leaves and broke off a small twig that held several green leaves on it. He climbed back down a ways and jumped the rest of the way out of the tree. He handed the twig to Legolas, who stared at it in confusion. Gives you something green to look at besides your clothes while we're underground, said Harry with a smile. Legolas looked at him straight into his green eyes, looked down at the branch, and slowly followed Boromir down the incline. Too bad you aren't an elf. You'd make a fine husband for my sister and a wonderful brother. Harry lagged behind and looked out onto the vast landscape, his thoughts dwelling back to Hogwarts and all those people he left behind. Then, a blonde barmaid crept into his mind. I knew it! You aren't going to make leaving this world any easier, thought Harry sadly. Harry, keep up, came Strider's voice. All right, said Harry, rushing after them. I'm coming. It was almost 2 weeks till they finally located the secret door to Moria. Well, at least Gandalf said it was a door. It's a wall, said Harry plainly, staring at the large rock wall. It's got to be like the door from the Lonely Mountain, said Merry excitedly. So, how many days are we going to have to sit here and wait for the lock to appear? Asked Pippin. Do we have a key? Asked Merry. A key is not needed, said Gandalf gruffly. All we require to reveal the door should be here, he said, looking up in the sky. The sun was beginning to set. We will have to wait for nightfall and hope for a clear night. Joyful, said Harry under his breath. What's wrong? Asked Sam. Something about this place. I don't like it, said Harry quietly. I can't pinpoint it, but something just feels wrong. Don't keep those feelings to yourself. Could be the deciding factor between life and death, said Strider. The wind rushed past them, causing Harry to pull his hood up. The coldness of the mountains seemed to have followed them, and Harry was still slightly weakened from the storm battle atop the peaks. He needed to be stronger, magically speaking. How he was going to become stronger was beyond his guess. They waited patiently, except for Merry and Pippin, who were extremely fidgety, beside the pool of water. Harry would have tried to catch some fish, but he didn't trust anything in there. Near vicinity. Strider took Sam aside and told him that they would have to send Bill the pony off. But Bill won't mind it. He can go in, said Sam earnestly. He loved his Bill. While they were in Rivendell, he made sure that Bill got well taken care of. adding at least 20 pounds to the horse's weight and groomed to perfection. Sam believed he could coax Bill to follow him anywhere. "A mind's no place for a pony, even one so brave as Bill," said Strider softly. "I don't want to lose Bill," said Sam worriedly. "He knows the way home," said Strider. "He'll head right back to Rivendell." "You sure he won't head back to Bree?" asked Pippin. Sam blanched. "That's where we bought him. I don't want Bill Ferny to get a hold of him. He knows where he got the most food and comfort. He'll head to Rivendell," said Strider with a smile. He removed the packs off of Bill's back and removed the bridle. He patted Bill's hindquarters and Bill set off slowly in the direction that they had come. "Don't worry, Sam," said Harry, walking up behind the small hobbit and smacking the back of Pippin's head lightly. "He'll be all right. He got off that mountain all right, didn't he? He can handle a few kilometers." "Kilometer?" asked Strider. "It's a way of judging distance back home," said Harry, trying to explain. He kneeled down amongst the packs and opened each one. "Let's divide these up. I'm not really seeing anything in here we can afford to leave behind. Do you, Strider?" Strider kneeled beside him and looked inside the packs. "You learn fast." "No, nothing. Everything comes with us." He looked at the two hobbits eyeing the bread in one of the packs. "I think the three of us should carry the food." "Good plan," said Harry with a smirk over to the crestfallen hobbits. "I'll carry my pots and pans." "There aren't very many of them," said Sam. Each person, except for Frodo and Gandalf, took on more things in their packs. Frodo had the ring to bear, and that was enough, though he did insist on taking some of the smaller things. Strider and Harry both figured that since Gandalf was leading them, and also the estimated age of the man, they wouldn't ask him to carry anything that he didn't already have in his own small pack. Soon, all the equipment and food from Bill's packs were loaded into the Fellowship's bags. Gimli insisted he could take more, while Legolas complained quietly that the weight would throw off his agility. Harry asked if they could compromise. Gimli could take more. Legolas wanted less, so Legolas could give Gimli some of his pack. "Stubborn," muttered Harry. Gimli stomped off, and Legolas kept a firm hold on his pack. "I've got enough," growled Gimli. "I'm strong, it won't affect me," said Legolas darkly. "I'm gonna lose my mind," said Harry. "Nothing will get them to work together. Besides a battle," said Gandalf with a chuckle. "If I could stand even a fraction of a chance against them, I'd take them on," said Harry. The sun had finally completed its daily job and decided to rest for the night. Gandalf and the rest of them watched in amazement as moonlight seemed to have been absorbed right into the rock and reflected its light in the outline of a door with funny-looking writing across it. Harry turned to look at the water. It stirred slightly. He couldn't tell if it were a fish or just his imagination. "Speak, friend, and enter," said Gandalf's voice, penetrating Harry's ears and bringing him out of his thoughts. "What do you suppose that means?" asked Merry. "It's very simple. If you're a friend, you speak the password and the door will open," said Gandalf. He turned to face the door, gestured dramatically with his arms, and shouted strange words that Harry, if he had a guess, would be Elvish. Nothing happened. Again, Gandalf shouted more Elvish words, and again the door didn't alter its appearance. "We sure this is the right door?" asked Pippin. "How many other doors like this do you think are around here?" asked Harry with a smirk. For 2 hours this went on. Gandalf must have said 100 different phrases in Elvish. Harry didn't dare ask Strider what each of them were for fear of being punched for being annoying. Legolas leaned against an old dead tree, waiting patiently, silently hoping they would not be able to gain access. Gimli was fidgeting once more. He couldn't wait to get inside. "Why doesn't Gimli tell Gandalf the password?" asked Sam. "Gimli doesn't know it," said Strider. "His cousins never sent word on what the passwords were, and it may be possible that they didn't take this path. They may have entered Moria through another passage." Suddenly Harry heard a loud splash. Then another one followed. Harry turned and saw Merry and Pippin tossing large rocks into the lake. Strider rushed over and grabbed Pippin's arm. "Do not disturb the water," he said quietly. "Oh, it's no use," said Gandalf, taking his hat off his head and tapping his staff down on the rock hard. Frodo looked up at the door inquisitively. Harry looked over at the water and saw that something underneath it was stirring, and his instincts were kicking into high gear. "So get out of there. We need to move," said Harry to Strider. "What is it?" asked Strider. "The water," said Harry, looking over at the lake. "What's the Elvish word for friend?" asked Frodo loudly. "Melon," said Gandalf, looking slightly confused at Frodo. They all jumped, When the door slowly opened to reveal a dark tunnel behind it, they gathered up their supplies and began to cautiously enter the dark mine. Soon, Master Elf, you will enjoy the fabled hospitality of the dwarves. Roaring fires, malt beer, red meat off the bone, said Gimli with a smile hiding behind his thick beard. Harry could only shake his head from what he remembered from Rivendell. Elves didn't eat their meat. Right off the bone, they carved it up in the kitchens and served it with delicate sauces and spices and surrounded by vegetables. He had the distinct feeling that in this place, Legolas might be going without meat for a while. And they call it a mine. A mine, said Gimli with a laugh. Harry reverted back to the present and took in their surroundings completely. He felt his stomach plummet. There were skeletons in full armor all over the place. They were covered in cobwebs and feathered with crude-looking arrows. The only light was coming from Gandalf's staff and a torch that Boromir had lit. "This is no mine," said Boromir shakily. "This is a tomb," said Harry, staring horrified at the surrounding scene. Gimli's face fell from pride to shock and finally a mixture of grief and horror. Legolas dropped beside a skeletal corpse and pulled out one of the arrows. "Goblins," he hissed, and drew his bow and reached for an arrow from his quiver. "We should never have come here," said Boromir. "We make for the Gap of Rohan. Now everyone get out." "Get out," said Gandalf fiercely. They began to back out of the mine slowly. Then Harry heard Frodo screaming and Sam yelling for Strider's help. "Strider," shouted Sam. Here he turned to see something that looked like the giant squid from Hogwarts' tentacles holding Frodo high up into the air. "Octa," said Harry weakly, but in the next moment he knew it wasn't the giant squid of the school lake. This thing was a monster. A monster he had never seen the likes of before. Strider pushed Harry back to protect the hobbits. "It's not safe for them. Keep them back," shouted Strider. Harry shook his head and began to drag the hobbits deeper into the mine. Gandalf led them further along, until they heard a crashing sound coming from behind them. A cascade of rocks fell in pursuit of the Fellowship, and Harry felt one fall right in front of him. A sharp pain struck him. He faltered slightly, closing his right eye, but he continued onward. Harry looked behind him and saw Boromir carrying Frodo with Aragorn right behind him. The large appendages of the beast were still trying to bring down the cave until they finally outran it, and was protected by the wall of fallen rocks. Unfortunately, that meant going through the goblin-conquered dwarven mine. Harry tried to look around in the thick darkness with his good eye, but he could see nothing. In the confusion, Gandalf's staff had gone out, but once he tapped the ground with it, it relit itself. "We have but one choice, to face the long dark of Moria," said Gandalf. But Boromir placed Frodo down on the ground and looked absently over to the boy. He received a bit of a shock. The scar that unfortunately adorned Harry's forehead was now considerably longer. It cut down his left eye and down his cheek, and it was bleeding heavily. Strider noticed that Boromir was staring at Harry and turned to see what attracted his attention. "Harry," said Strider in a hushed voice. "Huh?" said Harry, looking over at Strider, his eyes still closed. "You've been injured," said Strider, coming over and wiping the blood off of Harry's face. "This is starting to be a recurring theme," said Harry bitterly. Strider cleaned the wound on Harry's face, and it finally stopped. "It's bleeding." "We'll have a scar," said Strider, dabbing a handkerchief on Harry's eyelid, and wrapping a long piece of cloth around it. "I'll add it to my collection," said Harry with a smirk. "Is his eye damaged?" asked Mary worriedly. "I don't know, didn't exactly try it. We'll find out when it heals up a bit," said Harry with a smile. "I'm really starting to think that maybe waiting at Rivendell would have been the better bet." They followed Gandalf deep into mine, being carefully warned by him not to make any sound. They hoped that they would pass through the darkness without letting any remaining goblins know they were there. Though Harry figured Gandalf's light would be a dead giveaway if a goblin were to be passing by, or on patrol. They continued on, without the ability to tell night and day, and the threat of a goblin invasion. At any moment, they didn't stop until they could no longer summon the strength to go on. Fires were forbidden, and so was cooking food. The smell would no doubt attract somebody's attention, and they would come to investigate. When they did finally stop, they ate as silently as they could and drank as little as possible. There were no rivers, no streams that they could use, and they weren't about to try and operate one of the wells they had passed. Once a day, they were allowed a sip of the elvish water that Wellido had given Harry, but even that was beginning to run low. The squeaking of the pulley, the thud of the bucket, or the splash of the water might attract attention. We will make do with what we have, said Legolas to a thirsty Merry. Harry looked cautiously around, looking for moments in the darkness, but his seeker eyes caught nothing. His left eye wasn't pounding anymore by the time the third rest period came. Strider removed his bandage, and Harry tried out his eye. He could see all of them with his right eye just fine, but his left, nothing. Gandalf looked into Harry's eye. It doesn't appear damaged, perhaps if we let it rest a few more days. I hope so, said Harry quietly. Being half-blind in this world wouldn't be the best thing. Some people make do with it. I know an old Roman man that has survived many battles with that one eye, said Strider with a smile. Harry returned his smile, but he couldn't help but feel a bit homesick. Since he got that new scar, whenever he laid down to sleep, he could see Sirius and everyone else standing over him saying something and looking worried. He never heard them, as if his ears weren't working. He could tell he was in Grimmauld Place, in Ron in his bedroom. He tried so hard, but he couldn't lift his arms and touch any of them in his dream. But seeing them, it helped him a little. Onward they went, keeping as quiet as possible, dreading the moment, if it came, that they would be discovered. Harry prayed with all his heart that they all would get out all right. He didn't want to lose the hobbits, Legolas, Gimli, Boromir, and especially not Gandalf and Strider. In the case of Strider, he felt the same feeling for him like he did for Sirius, a brother and a father all rolled into one. As for Gandalf, well, before Dumbledore decided to abandon him, he had the same connection with him too. His heart ached whenever he thought of them. When he got back, the first thing he was going to do was just hold Sirius close to him and not let go for the longest time. Dumbledore, first he'd punch him square in the face, hugging would come later. They came to a large elevated dais where there were 3 different directions they could take. Harry had a sickening feeling. One would get them hopelessly lost, one was the continuing path out, and the other would lead straight into the horde of goblins. Thank goodness that Gandalf knew which way to go. Gandalf, however, didn't move from where he stopped. I have no memory of this place, said Gandalf in a low voice. Or they could be stuck there for a while. Sirius came back from the bathroom and sat back down in his chair. He reached to pick up the book he was reading. He looked up at Harry's face and nearly screamed. Harry's face was covered in blood from a deep cut on his face. What the? Harry, how the hell do you get hurt so often? Said Sirius worriedly. He ripped open the drawer and yanked out a bunch of bandages. He worked feverishly to try and staunch the flow of blood. He tipped several potions down Harry's mouth, and finally the bleeding subsided. He lifted Harry's eyelid to inspect his eye, to see if the eye wasn't damaged. Oh my God, screamed Sirius. There was a crash from downstairs, and in an instant the door burst open. Everyone that was in the house, Dumbledore, the Weasleys, the Grangers, and several members of the Order was now crammed into the room. What is it? Asked Mr. Weasley quickly. Did Harry wake up? Asked Ron. Oh, Merlin, he's hurt again, said Bill. Sirius, said Remus, shoving over to Sirius. His eye! Look at his eye, said Sirius frantically. Dumbledore rushed to the front of the bed, his stomach twisted into a knot when he saw the newly formed scar on his young charge's face and looked into the boy's eye. The brilliant green color that normally danced in his eye was no longer present, but replaced with milky white. There wasn't even a pupil anymore. Dumbledore's face whitened. He gently lifted Harry's right eyelid, but this eye was fine, just as bright and beautiful as ever. Dumbledore, what's going on? You say you know something about this crown thing on Harry's head. Now his left eye is hurt. You better start talking before I start swinging, said Sirius, grabbing the old man tightly by the collar. Dumbledore sighed heavily and sank weakly down on the bed beside Harry. He took Harry's limp hand into his own shaking one. Where do I start? Said Dumbledore heavily. At the beginning, I shouldn't wonder. I was quite young when I first saw that crown, still within my teen years, I believe. It was adorning the head of a man who came to Hogwarts. The entire school was up in an uproar. None of the students knew why, but the teachers were gathering paters and rushing about quite agitated. What was going on? Asked Fred. I'm getting there, said Dumbledore, with a slight smile. It wasn't long till this man came. Every student was to stand at attention at each of their house tables. He walked up and down each table, looking at everyone individually. Not saying a word, once he looked at the last person, he shook his head and left. That's it. He didn't say a single thing? Asked Hermione. Not one word to us, but the headmaster at the time ran after him and tried to speak with him. It turns out that that man was looking for an heir of sorts, said Dumbledore. An heir? Asked George. An heir to what? Asked Ron. We do not know. We were never officially told, though from the crown upon his head we assume the greatest of kingdoms, said Dumbledore. What kingdom? Asked Hermione. Think of it this way. The Muggle world each has their own rulers' appointed heads. Do they not? Asked Dumbledore. Yes, said Hermione slowly. Well, our world is somewhat similar, only we have one ruler, one absolute ruler, wherever there is magic of any sorts. He is there. That man was called King Maendenbohr, a kind and powerful man, said Dumbledore fondly, though with the corruption of the lesser branches of government, he has become rather disgusted with us. But wouldn't that mean he's partly at fault for not taking action? Asked Hermione. You would think that, but the king's created the governments here in almost mirror image of the Muggle world so that he may spend most of his time maintaining the balance, said Dumbledore. What? Asked Ron. Dumbledore thought carefully. It's said that in Castle Valor there is a room atop the highest tower, and inside is a giant orb made of diamond and crystal. One side reflects the Muggle-borns, and the other reflects the pure blood. If, for example, the diamond side overtakes the crystal side, then whichever side the crystal represented, that side would experience a drop in magical strength, and their numbers would decrease. Which side is which? Asked Ginny. No one knows. It takes many decades of complete neglect for it to show, said Dumbledore. No one has seen King Maendenbohr for many, many years. We are unsure if he is even alive. What? Said Hermione. So we've gone a long time without a king. If we can get on without him, then... Miss Granger, said Dumbledore, his voice suddenly like steel, do not disrespect someone you do not even know. Besides, if we do not have anyone keeping the world's magic in balance, half of our world will collapse. And soon after the others, we won't be the only casualties. Every magical being in will suffer as well. So what does that have to do with Harry? Said Sirius. Perhaps he will be King Maendenbohr's new heir, said Dumbledore, giving Harry's hand a squeeze, though I do hope that is not the case. Why do you say that? Asked Bill. Being king might help the fight against you-know-who. He'd be a wicked king, said Ron with the excited smile. Harry is already burdened with hardships, especially right now. He doesn't need added trouble, said Dumbledore. True, we can't even wake him up, said Remus. That's not the only problem. We'd never see him ever again, said Dumbledore sadly. He'd make time for us, said Hermione with certainty. He would try it, of course, but it would never happen. He has the whole world to look after, said Dumbledore. Hang on. This king person could still be alive. I mean, you don't know for a fact if he's dead yet, do you? Asked Mrs. Granger worriedly. That's right, said Dumbledore. Then there may be a chance that he's still alive and looking for an heir. Why not go to this Castle Valor and find him, said Mr. Granger. Ask him about how to wake Harry up, and then ask him about the whole crown business. Good notion, but alas, there's a problem with that idea, said Dumbledore with a sigh. What's that? Asked Mrs. Weasley. Castle Valor isn't in any country, said Dumbledore. He pointed a long finger up to the ceiling. Its travels in the air. It's hardly ever in the same place twice. How can a... Never mind. I can barely understand Hermione when she comes home for the summer, said Mr. Granger, with a smile towards his daughter. Dumbledore reached over and gently pulled down Harry's eyelid, hiding the milky orb, and kissed the boy's forehead. I'll go and find the castle, if it's the last thing I do, said Dumbledore. Suddenly, Kingsley Shacklebolt came into the room. We just got word Umbridge has been found. Finally, let's go ask the bitch what she did to Harry, said Remus angrily. Still say she's behind it. That might be hard to prove, said Kingsley. Why do you say that? Asked Mrs. Weasley. Just give her Veritaserum. Can't give it to the dead. According to St. Mungo's, she was burnt alive. Harry leaned against a large stone slab and closed his good eye. He had been feeling a bit tired, and with Aragorn's solemn promise that he would watch his packs against Merry and Pippin, he settled down for a rest. Every time he closed his eyes, he could still see Sirius and a few of the others. Now, Dumbledore was in the picture. He didn't feel like punching Dumbledore anymore. Well, at least not at that point. Maybe he'd settle for a slap. Aragorn noticed a tear slowly falling down Harry's cheek. Seems the boy is weaker than we thought, said Boromir with sneer. How would you like it if you were unceremoniously dropped in a strange world with absolutely nothing to aid your or cover your naked body? Snapped Strider. I think he's doing better than most grown men could. Legolas and Gimli stared at the youth, who was now quietly moaning. Aragorn placed a calloused hand over the boy's mouth, but he heard the boy give a sort of choked cry. "No, don't kill them, please. Take me. Leave them," moaned Harry quietly. He jerked back awake and found Strider's hand covering his mouth. "Sing, ooh," mumbled Harry. "What was that?" asked Strider, removing his hand. "Can I help you?" repeated Harry with a smirk. "You were moaning," said Strider. "I wanted to keep you quiet in case you got any louder." "Oh, sorry. Well, it was nice not having those dreams for a while," said Harry quietly. "I'm bored," whined Pippin. "Yeah, me too. Harry, could you finish the story that you were telling us at Rivendell?" asked Mary, crawling over to where Harry was. "I don't remember where I left off," said Harry. "It was when you finally found Peter and then he got away," said Pippin eagerly. Harry cleared his throat as the hobbits drew closer to listen to his story. Frodo looked away quickly, then hurried up to Gandalf. "Am I that boring?" asked Harry with a smile. He didn't mention that he noticed Frodo looking very worried. "No, he's always sort of been close to Gandalf," said Mary. "Come on, get on with the story," said Pippin. Legolas, Gimli, Strider, and Boromir sat a short distance away from the rest of the group, catching different snippets of the story being told. "And here you thought he was weak," said Gimli with a smirk, as Harry reached the part about confronting the dragon. "I cannot believe he would want to go back. It seems more trouble than it is worth," said Legolas. "I guess home is home," said Strider. Suddenly, Gandalf made a sound. "Oh, it's that way," said Gandalf with a smile. "He's remembered," said Mary excitedly. "No, it's just the air doesn't smell so foul down there. When in doubt, Meriadoc, always follow your nose." "Sounds like the breakfast cereal slogan," said Harry with his smile. They traveled slowly down the dark stairs, and Harry's fingers were almost permanently crossed by now. They reached the end of the stairs, and taking a huge risk, Gandalf brightened the end of his staff. Harry looked around with wide eyes. This place would hold at least 3 great halls, and still have room for the entrance hall. "Behold the dwarf city of Duarodolf," said Gandalf. "There's an eye-opener and no mistake," said Sam. They continued onward into the dark city. Harry had to squint with his good eye to see the dark buildings on the sides of vast open area. If this place were properly lit, this would be something even more wonderful, thought Harry with a bright smile. He could almost picture the dwarves hustling and bustling about the columns and tinging of hammers on metal. They walked deeper down the city until Gimli gave a shout and rushed towards a room that seemed to overflow with light. "Gimli," said Gandalf quickly. They all ran after Gimli into the light-filled room. Dumbledore hurried back to Hogwarts, arranged for Moody to come back and teach temporarily, and asked Hagrid for a thesтерal. "How's Harry?" asked Hagrid quietly. "Has he woken up yet?" "Not yet, and I'm very worried. But if I can have a thesтерal, perhaps I can remedy that," said Dumbledore. Though his voice didn't have the certainty it always did. "Here, take this one. He's the strongest of the bunch," said Hagrid, leading one forward. "Is there anything I can do to help? I can guard him, or something." "Sirius is doing that, but I'm sure an extra prayer wouldn't be amiss," said Dumbledore quietly as he climbed upon the Bastro's back. Hagrid's face fell slightly. Dumbledore gave him a reassuring smile. "I'll see if Grubbly Plank can come and take over your classes. Then you can go and join Sirius on guard duty." "I'd appreciate it," said Hagrid with a smile. Dumbledore smiled and then spurred the thestral into the air. "I'll send word when I land to rest." "I must find him," thought Dumbledore determinedly. Harry didn't know how everything went to hell. It all pretty much happened so fast. They had followed Gimli into the brightly lit room, was met with a tragic scene for Gimli to behold. The room was bathed in light that had to have been coming from reflectors that led to this room, and it rested on a large tomb in the middle. Harry could tell the only reason the reflectors were even put in was for the purpose of honoring someone. The moment Gimli saw it, he fell to his knees and wept. Harry wanted to walk over and put a comforting hand on Gimli's shoulder, but a sound stopped him. It was music. His pulse raced. The sound was bouncing off the almost empty room, and it would take him hours to find it. He took out the compass in his pocket and held it out. The compass turned slowly around and faced the area to the left of him. He walked over in that direction and didn't stop until the compass started spinning around in a circle. He looked down and saw a loose piece of stone in the wall. He gently took the stone out of the wall, causing several spiders to skittle down and away from the monster that had removed the stone that had guarded their home for generations. He peered inside the hole and saw a small box inside. He pulled the box carefully out of the wall and gently blew the dust off the lid. In a beautiful silver box, gilded with gold and set with beautiful rubies, he felt a stirring in his stomach. He didn't want to give it to Gimli, and he didn't even want to show him the box. Harry had to shake his head to get rid of the thoughts in his head. He stood up and walked slowly over to the rest of the fellowship. They were looking over the room slowly. Harry walked over to Gandalf and held the box out for him to see. "I found this," said Harry quietly. Gandalf looked down at the box and took a hold of it, but Harry wouldn't let go. "Something wrong?" he asked. "I think you might have to pry my fingers loose," said Harry slowly. "Ah, a common dwarf protection," said Gandalf with a smile. "You must have found a great treasure. I am quite amazed that you brought it to my attention." "I didn't want to," said Harry. "Still barely want to." Gandalf pried the young man's fingers off the box and opened it slowly. Inside he saw several diamonds, different sizes and different cuts, each a flawless bit of starlight. "Don't you already have a diamond?" asked Gandalf. "Yeah, but the music and compass led me right to it," said Harry. "King Dumbledore had one of each stone that can be found in the world," said Gandalf, stirring the contents of the box with his finger. Harry's eye flicked open wider when he saw a flash of amber. "There," said Harry, pointing into the box. He didn't want to touch the box again. Gandalf tried to be gentle when prying his hand loose, but it didn't quite work. He could feel his hands almost bruised and shiny with light burns. Gandalf stirred the contents a little more until he found the stone. "A topaz," said Gandalf, holding the jewel up. "Here you are." He handed the jewel to Harry. Harry looked at the jewel intently. "Let's give this to Gimli," said Gandalf with a smile. Harry flashed him an angry look, but shook his head quickly, then nodded. "I'll take that as a yes," said Gandalf with a fond smile. Gandalf patted Harry's shoulder and placed the box gently on the tomb's lid. Gimli looked up and stared at the box. "The treasure of Khazad-dûm," said Gimli with a shaky voice. He opened the box slowly, tears falling from his eyes. "I will protect it with my life." Harry smiled faintly. The grip that held his stomach hostage was gone, and he could finally relax. He'd have to ask Gimli what was so special about those stones later. Gandalf gave Pippin his hat and staff as he made his way over to a large book being held in the final death grip of a skeletal dwarf. He took the book, showing the departed as much dignity as he could, and opened it slowly. He turned to the back of the book and read aloud, "They have taken the bridge, and the second hall we cannot get out. Drums, drums in the deep. We cannot get out." Harry looked around the room. He didn't want to hear in detail how Gimli's people were wiped out. It was bad enough in his third year that he had to listen to his own parents' lives extracted from their bodies. He didn't want to hear anything like that again. Suddenly he heard a great crash and turned to face Pippin. He was staring ashen-faced at the well that was in the back of the room. Several echoing crashes came soon after, as whatever he knocked down the well continued to fall down the abyss. Harry's breath froze in his lungs until finally the banging of the unknown object crashed for the last time. Once he was sure no sound came afterward, he released the air from his lungs. Pippin had winced every time that the object crashed against something deep below them. "Fool of the Took, throw yourself in next time and rid us of your stupidity," hissed Gandalf, taking his staff and hat forcefully from the hobbit. Pippin looked down in shame, but suddenly a pounding came from deep down the well. They turned their eyes fearfully towards the gaping hole. They could hear the pounding getting louder and louder, and then a new sound came to their ears. Shrieking. "Frodo!" said Sam. Frodo pulled out his small sword. Harry couldn't believe it. It was glowing. "Why," said Harry, pointing at the sword. "Goblins," hissed Legolas. Harry grasped the hilt of his sword and pulled it swiftly from his sheath, his own blade glowing, but strangely it wasn't blue, but red with a gold streak down the middle.
"Brace the door." "Little one, stay close to Gandalf," said Strider as Boromir and Legolas made to brace the door. Harry took a step to help them, but Strider held out his sword. "That means you too."
Harry scowled and took another step to say that he could help and that he wasn't a little one, but Gandalf pulled him back. "We cannot lose you or Frodo. You both have great tasks you must complete. Do not fall to lucky arrows," said Gandalf quietly. Harry grudgingly stayed back but readied his sword. "Valerian." "A true battle at last," said a voice. Harry looked quickly around, but he saw no one and this voice didn't belong to anyone that was there. Great, now I'm hearing voices. This day is just getting better and better, thought Harry darkly. I couldn't agree more. I was afraid I was going to be forgotten. I was expecting you to fly into battle soon after I was given to you, said the voice with a sneer. What the hell? Thought Harry, looking at the sword. You're quick-witted, I like that, said the voice. He could hear the smirk behind the voice. Want me to take over, like I did at the cottage? I can fight my own battles, thought Harry, frustrated. Goblins and wolves are two different beings. Wolves don't have bows, arrows, swords, and spears, said the voice. Harry shook his head, but he decided to play nice. He'll contemplate why his sword was talking to him later. Now really wasn't the time. Can we work together? I'll settle for that, said the voice smoothly. Harry steeled himself just in time for Boromir to groan. They have a cave troll. Oh, not again, said Harry, rolling his eyes. He looked up and saw a stalactite hanging from the ceiling. I can handle that. Just remember, you have goblins to fight too. Don't focus all your attentions on the troll, said the voice. Harry nodded. He tightened his grip on his sword. Let the fun begin, both Harry and the voice seemed to say at the same time. He watched with vicious glee as Legolas shot several arrows into the holes of the door that the foul creatures beyond had made with their swords and axes. Soon the doors crashed open and the room was flooded with goblins. Each one had a twisted and wicked-looking face. Let's go, boy, said the voice. Harry lunged forward and swung his sword. The sharpness of the blade cut the goblin cleanly in half. He moved about the room, slicing through every goblin that came his way, and keeping well in front of the stalactite on the ceiling. Soon, he had to go chasing after the goblins that were themselves. Chasing the hobbits around, the goblins soon discovered that if they went towards either the bigger people or the short one with the beard, they were cut down instantly. The little ones were inexperienced and better targets. Harry, however, dashed that advantage and kept guard over the hobbits. Then, the troll came in. The goblins began to scatter, rush out of the room, hoping to avoid injury from the overgrown, brainless behemoth. Harry looked up at the ceiling. The troll was still too far away for the stalactite to do much damage. He had to lure it to where he wanted it to go. Harry leapt over to the tomb, the word Balin sticking in his memory, and stood atop it. Show respect. Scolded the voice. We will in a minute. Over here, big boy, shouted Harry, tossing a rock at the troll's eye. The troll roared and came stomping over to Harry, squashing orcs and goblins under its feet as it went. That's it, little closer. A second later, the troll was right where Harry needed him to be. Harry reached deep into his pouch, grabbed the amethyst, and brought it out. Lightning, thought Harry. A bright flash of electricity shot from the stone and crashed into the ceiling, right above the stalactite. The rock cracked, and it fell, impaling itself in the troll's skull. The remaining goblins ran for their lives. That was gross, said Harry, staring at what little brain matter the troll had start oozing out of the skull. Nicely handled, though, said Gandalf. It prevented anyone else from being hurt. Very good, said the voice approvingly. Frodo, shouted Sam. They all turned and saw Frodo slumped against the wall. His eyes were closed, and there was a spear sticking perpendicular out of the side of his abdomen. Strider, Sam, and Gandalf hurried over to him. Strider took the spear away from Frodo's body. Harry could see that Frodo was pale. He looked dead. He picked the small body up off the ground and prepared to run out of the room, taking the small frame with him. I can walk, said a voice coming from Frodo's body. I thought you were dead, said Strider in a whisper. No time. We must go, said Gandalf, hurriedly. He ushered them onward, out of the tomb of Balin and into the large hall. Harry looked up and saw what looked like the upside-down version of ants crawling out of an anthill. They were going to die. Harry reached into his pouch and brought out the topaz stone. Desperation hopefully worked in his favor this time. Hope this doesn't do them any good. He held the stone up into the air as he ran. Suddenly, a large piece of rock came out of the ground a few feet away from them and slammed itself into hole, stopping more of them from coming out. Love it, said Harry with a smile as he continued to run. They continued running as fast as they could down the hall until they found their path blocked by a battalion of goblins. They slowly moved their way towards the Fellowship. Gandalf extended his sword in a silent gesture that Harry took to mean back the hell up. The goblins circled around the fellowship and prepared to close the circle in quick. Harry took the topaz out of his pouch and prepared to bring down a large part of the ceiling, if he had to. He hoped it would work again, and that it wasn't a fluke or that he misinterpreted the power. Suddenly another pounding came from the tunnel off the room. Only the sound wasn't the only thing that came. A red glow came from the tunnel. Along with pounding sounds came a great roar. The goblins began to scatter and climb up the pillars, and stuff themselves into any crack in the ceiling they could find. Gandalf bowed his head slightly as he listened to the roar. "What the devil is that?" asked Boromir. "A Balrog, a creature of the ancient world. This power is beyond any of you. Run," shouted Gandalf as he turned and led them down another corridor. Strider had to clasp onto Harry's arm and pull him along with them. "Now is not the time to freeze," he hissed. They ran as fast as they could down several flights of stairs until Boromir nearly toppled to his death in his haste to follow Gandalf's orders. "Lead them on, Aragorn," said Gandalf, bringing up the rear. He allowed the others to go ahead of him on the stairs. "The bridge is near." They all peered into the distance. Harry could see a thin stone bridge that was near. Strider made a move to go back and fight whatever terror it was that haunted their steps, but Gandalf stopped him. "Do as I say," shouted Gandalf, pushing Strider back. "Swords are no more use here." They picked up their pace again and raced onward. The hobbits were getting tired, and their own pace was slowing. They were about to come to the consensus of picking up the hobbits and carrying them when they came to the strangest-looking staircase Harry had ever seen. Before they could even think about getting down the second set of stairs, a large rock came down and smashed a part of stairs. Legolas looked at the distance and jumped nimbly down to the opposite side. "Come on, Gandalf," said Legolas urgently. Gandalf took a step back and leapt with all his strength and landed in the outstretched arms of Legolas. Boromir picked up Merry and Pippin and leapt over the space with a shout. However, as he landed, a few of the steps fell away into the deep chasm beneath them, never to return. Harry looked at the distance himself and thought that it was either now or never. Harry took several steps back and leapt. He landed into Gandalf and Boromir's outreaching arms and caught him gently. Harry turned, and after he helped catch Sam, he saw that only Gimli, Strider, and Frodo were left behind. Gimli stopped Strider before he could even think about tossing him like he did Sam. "No one tosses a dwarf," said Gimli. He took a giant leap, but fell slightly short. The only thing that kept him from falling to his death was Legolas grabbing his beard and pulling him forward. "Not the beard," said Gimli from his teetering position. They pulled Gimli to safety, but another rock fell. The gap became even wider. Harry couldn't see how they were going to get over to their side, especially with the snipers on the walls. Legolas pulled out his bow and quickly pelted the air with arrows. Each arrow met a target and said, "Target met the ground," almost a mile beneath them. Harry was about to bring out the topaz, but soon the staircase began to move back and forth slowly, teetering by the great weight held by the increasingly shrinking support pillar. Harry stared in amazement as Strider maneuvered the stairs so that they didn't have far to jump at all. Once they got reunited with each other, they continued down the stairs and didn't stop. They didn't halt even when they were met with a wall of intense flames right beside them. Harry was right ahead of Gandalf and had crossed the bridge halfway before he had turned and saw Gandalf was facing a giant. Harry could only describe it as a demon. Its entire body was covered in hellish flames. Two smoldering horns came curling out of his head. His eyes, nostrils, and mouth gave off a light as if a furnace were inside the beast's body. "Get across the bridge," shouted Gandalf as he turned and ran towards him. Harry's good eye was opened wide in shock. "Now, boys," shouted the voice. He felt his sword almost him dragged backwards to the end of the bridge. He came back to his senses and pulled out the topaz. He slammed his fist up into the air and a wall of rock came shooting up, stopping the monster in its track. He turned and ran. Gandalf followed him onto the bridge. Harry thought they were home free, but the rock that he summoned up was smashed by the Balrog in a furious rage. Harry was on the other side of the bridge, but Gandalf was still in the middle of the bridge. Gandalf turned to face the monster. Suddenly, every sound that was pounding through his ears was now violence, and the entire world was slowed. He could see the Balrog slowly bring its whip like a thin lash of fire down, trying to strike Gandalf. Gandalf deflected it and parried the sword of fire at the same time. Gandalf brought his staff up slowly. Suddenly, the world of silence was broken for one terrible moment. "You shall not pass," he bellowed and brought his staff slamming into the ground. The rock underneath the Balrog's feet crumbled away, and despite its blazing wings, it fell into the abyss. Harry slowly breathed. It was over. Gandalf turned to go over to the rest of the Fellowship, but the monster's whip came shooting out of the darkness and pulled him back to the ledge that Gandalf had made and knocked his sword and staff off into the pit. Harry made to run to the wizard's aid, still dwelling in silence and almost frozen in time. Strider caught him and held him back. Harry could see Gandalf's eyes wide with what he deemed fear. He saw his mouth move to say something, but Harry couldn't hear or understand his words. Then, the one man he thought could get him home, the man who he had become so fond of, let go of the ledge. He fell, and with him, Harry's hopes of ever seeing Hogwarts again. Sirius cleaned each wound that settled on his godson's body. He was developing bruises, even more cuts in his breathing. Instead of normal breaths, became pants, and sweat poured off his temple and entire body. Harry's cuts were becoming more and more frequent, and his eye was still milky white. Sirius could barely contain his frantic worry from overtaking his body until he saw something. "Mysterious ailment? Tell me, Dumbledore, what are his symptoms?" said the king, leaning back in his chair. Dumbledore didn't bother asking him how he knew his name. Now was not the time. He glanced at the stot of himself and smirked at his own mindlessness. He was, however, overjoyed that the king had decided to help him. "We found him on the floor in Hogwarts, his body riddled with cuts and gashes. He has not woken up since we've then," said Dumbledore, still kneeling on the floor. The ghost leaned forward on his throne. "Has he developed any more injuries?" All this time that Harry had been stricken with whatever had happened, he had never done this. Harry was crying. No sound was coming from Harry's lips, but tears fell freely down his face. Sirius gently lifted Harry into his arms and rocked the boy gently, trying hard to stop the tears coming from his godson's eyes, and his own. Harry sat on the boulders outside of the mountain. Tears fell silently down his face and showered the rocks in which he rested upon. Back in the mine, Harry could barely keep up with Boromir, Aragorn, and Legolas as they ushered and pushed him, and the hobbits out of the dark cavern and into the bright sunshine that was only hundreds of feet upwards. What happened for it all to go wrong? It had to be Pippin, accidentally dropping that bucket and skeleton down the well. No, he couldn't blame Pippin. He wanted to, but he couldn't. Pippin didn't know that this was going to happen. He didn't have the faintest idea that that small action would have such tremendous and tragic consequences. And if Pippin was anything like him, he was already beating himself up over it. "Legolas, get him up," said Aragorn. Harry looked up with reddened eyes. "What?" "Give him a moment for pity's sake," said Boromir, as he tried to hold Gimli back from storming the mine by himself and going to kill the Balrog with anything and everything he had. "By nightfall, these hills will be swarming with orcs," said Aragorn. "Best to make sure we put a large distance between us and here by then. We make for Lothlórien." He bent over Sam. "Let's see your wounds before we take off." "I don't care," said Sam sourly. Aragorn looked at bruises carefully. "You'll be fine. Your turn, Frodo." "I don't care. There's no hope without Gandalf," said Frodo angrily. "And we will do without hope. There is always vengeance," said Aragorn shortly. He took a hold of Frodo's tunic and opened it gently. A glittering sight met his widened eyes. "Mithril!" gasped Gimli when the glittering light caught his eye. Frodo closed his tunic protectively. "Don't worry. Only you and maybe Merry could wear it," said Aragorn, with a shaky smile. He stood up and walked over to Harry, who was barely listening to what was transpiring. "Come on, Harry, we need to go," said Aragorn softly. "I had so many questions about the king, and I never asked them," said Harry sadly. I know he was a great friend to me as well, but we must continue on. We have 2 sets of powerful items that could prove disastrous for Middle-earth if they fall into the wrong hands," said Aragorn. He pulled Harry to his feet and placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "I can't believe I will say this, but we will need your magic now." Harry gave a small smile, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. As the others began to follow Aragorn down the hill, Harry turned and looked up to the large mountain chain. Tears still burned his cheeks. He knelt on the rock he was standing on, took out his amethyst, and the topaz clenched both in his hands, and closed his eyes. When he opened them, he saw what he had hoped to see. The rock beneath him turned into a giant, round, smooth crystal. It wasn't as transparent as some crystals were. This one had a storm raging inside it. He was hoping for trapped clouds, but he supposed a storm reflected his feelings at that point. On the crystal's face, it read in yellow letters, Gandalf Stormcrow. Stormcrow asked Harry out loud. Did you just let the magic do its will? Asked the voice in surprise. Yeah, sort of. This looks really awesome, but where did the Stormcrow part come from? Thought Harry. It is told that people call him that when he heralds times of woe, but the origin of the name comes from the time of King Miandinbor. He called Gandalf the name Stormcrow as a way of, how you would say, teasing, said the voice. How do you know? Asked Harry. The time for that knowledge has yet to be conceived, said the voice. It's one rerun after another, said Harry with a groan. Harry stood up, wiped his eyes on his sleeve, and had to run at full speed to catch up the others. They made their way swiftly away from the mountains, not stopping even for one moment to rest. If one of the hobbits became tired, Boromir or Strider would carry one of them on their backs. They finally slowed their pace when they reached the safety of trees of Lothlórien. Harry panted heavily behind a large elm tree. Come along, we need to keep moving towards the center of the forest, said Legolas, trying to pull Harry along. Dumbledore was still flying through the skies on the Destral. He barely stopped for even a moment to rest his old and venerable frame. In order to have even the slightest bit of hope, he used a sensing spell to try and find Castle Valor. But twice now, the spell would have him turn around and start in another direction. He had been at it for almost 6 days straight, and he had nothing to show for it, except for blisters on his hands from constantly hanging on to the Stral's reins and the coming of a cold. Once he thought briefly of giving up, but the visual of Harry's unconscious and bleeding form lying motionless in the bed at Gimli Place stayed in his mind and forced him to continue on. He had to find the castle and get some answers. A fierce storm swarmed and raged around him, sending a chilling rain right through to his bones. He had to either find the castle soon or fly to the ground and seek out shelter. Suddenly, through the flash of lightning, something came into view briefly. It was a tower in the sky. He spurred the Stral on faster and hurried to the spot before it disappeared. Come on, said Dumbledore hurriedly. A castle came into view. It was almost a carbon copy of Hogwarts floated upon a silver cloud. There was a large metal gate around the edge of the cloud, and despite the ground being hundreds of feet below, there were trees, flowers, hedges, and even fountains stationed in front of the castle. He landed the stroll right in front of the door just as the castle began to fade out. The fading image immediately stopped, and the color and the physical structure became solid again. But the rain still came crashing down on him. He jumped off the death straw and pounded on the door. Please, someone answer. The door opened slowly, and Dumbledore hurried in. He turned to coax the Celestial inside the castle out of the damage of the storm, but the skeletal horse was gone. He turned to actually take in the appearance of the surroundings, when suddenly the door closed with a bang. He hurried over to the door and instinctively pulled at the handle. The door wouldn't budge. He fired spell after spell at the ancient door, but met with the same results. He was trapped. Harry followed the rest of the remaining fellowship deeper into the forest. They slowed their pace to almost a stalking crouch. Harry could almost feel the trees breathing overhead, and sometimes he would see something fluttering between the trunks of the trees. Do you want me to turn back into a stag and check the area ahead? Asked Harry. I can make sure that the path is safe for the little ones. Not in this area. We are in elvish country, and when elves see a stag like the one you can turn into, they shoot it, said Aragorn. I need to get my hands on a bird, said Harry, looking around. That would come in real handy right now. Next time I see a turkey, I'll let you know, said Boromir with a sneer. Ha ha, said Harry, rolling his eyes. A little further ahead, Gimli was telling the hobbits about the treachery of the Golden Wood and the elf witch Galadriel, much to the disgust of Legolas. Harry bowed his head and shook it. Do not speak of things you know nothing about, hissed Legolas. This is one she will not ensnare with her magic, said Gimli. Then his continuous rant was silenced. Everything was silenced. Harry looked up and saw an arrow pointing at his good eye. He talked so loud we could have shot him in the dark, said one of the elves. Silkly. He walked up to Aragorn and began to speak to him. They were utterly surrounded by at least 20 elves. Each fellowship was guarded by 2 elves, each with an arrow targeted at their skulls. Harry noticed that Aragorn looked at the elf in front of him as if he knew him, but this elf in front of Harry made him uneasy. This elf didn't sit right with him. "What's this pouch?" said the elf in Harry's blind spot. He could feel someone reaching and taking light hold of the pouch that held all the stones he had acquired. Harry's hand shot down like lightning and held on to the pouch on his hip. "No," said the voice suddenly. Suddenly, a blow came to the back of his head, and he knew no more. Strider was trying to explain to his old friend Halder what they were doing, and that they obviously meant them no harm. When out of the corner of his eye, he saw Harry fall to the ground. He saw the elf lowering his dagger back into its small leather sheath. "No!" shouted Strider. He hurried over to where Harry fell and glared up at the elf, who held Harry's pouch in his hand. The elf was gripping the pouch tightly, then made to open it and examine its contents. "There is nothing in here, yet I can feel something," said the elf in wonder.
"Give that back," spat Strider angrily. The other elves looked at the two standing above the fallen youth, torn with conflict. They felt the need to stand beside one of the their own, but the person they struck was a boy. If he were one of their own, he'd be tiny elfling, no more than a babe.
"Until we know your motives, this pouch stays with us," said the elf with a sneer. "Give it back, Niran," said Haldir. He had seen Estelle act this way only once. This meant that the person lying on the ground is beyond and above suspicion. The elf looked at Haldir, scowled, and threw the pouch on the ground. Aragorn took the pouch and placed it deep into his own pockets. He picked up Harry's unconscious form and held it close to his body protectively. "What's so important about that pouch?" asked Haldir quietly. "I'll tell you when we get into the safety of Lothlórien," said Aragorn. "But please, grant us asylum." Haldir looked pensive. "Very well. The lady will want to have a word with you, and boy about that pouch, and why you seem so defensive about it." "Going to blindfold us?" asked Strider, looking at the corner of his eye to Gimli. "I would, if we hadn't attacked your young charge for no reason," said Haldir with a frown to the two elves, who themselves were looking angry. Harry seemed to never stop falling into the cold darkness that surrounded him. He couldn't even lift his arms or open his eyes. "I should really be used to this feeling," thought Harry grimly. "I've been here so much that it should be my mailing address." He just floated around in the darkness until he felt the coldest slowly slip away and was replaced with a gentle warming sensation, like a warm, soothing bath. In fact, his skin did feel wet. It was a bath, and someone was pouring water over him. He tried to open his eyes with his remaining strength, but nothing happened. "Relax, child, it will be all right," said a deep, soothing voice. Harry groaned and shifted his body slightly. His eyes fluttered open, and he saw, standing over him, a shirtless, silver-haired elf pouring a silver ladle of water on top of his head. He became aware that he was floating gently in a large pool of water, and the elf was standing in the water with him, supporting him. What's going on?" asked Harry weakly. "I'm tending to your wound," said the man soothingly. It was a little while till Harry noticed that he could see out of both eyes. "Rest, child, you're almost done healing," said the elf. He continued to ladle water over the top of Harry's body. Harry closed his eyes and sighed as he could feel the water wash over him and strengthen his body straight down into his soul. He had never felt so good before in his life. "Estelle holds you in high esteem, young one, much like a father worships a son," said the elf calmly. "Who's Estelle?" asked Harry quietly. "You know him as Aragorn," said the elf. Harry could feel the sides of his mouth turn into a small smile. Once the elf was done pouring water all over him, the elf helped him to stand. Harry realized three things. First thing, the water came all the way up to his middle. The second thing, the water was unnaturedly green. Third thing, he was naked again. "No need to turn that shade, child. I've been healing you in this pool for 3 hours. Seems you have more injuries than just the blow to the back of your head that the basin needed to see to," said the elf with a kind smile. Harry looked at him. He was shirtless, but he was wearing leggings and peering at him with concern. "I'm Lord Celeborn." Harry gulped. "Thank you, sir," he said nervously as he looked around. "But before you ask, those stones in the pouch you carry brought me to take over your care," said Celeborn. He waved his hand over the green water. "This is the Lothlórien basin. It has the strongest healing powers this world has to offer, but not many people can fully utilize its powers." "Then how could I?" asked Harry. "You and I are two of the few that can bathe and heal in this pool. Aragorn is another person, but he's never had to use it," said Celeborn. He gently let go of Harry, and Harry's feet touched the bottom. Harry sighed. This was a lot of information for someone who just woke up. He turned, looking for a robe or something to cover himself. He hoped to everything holy that he didn't have to go and piss off a wild boar again just to get a shroud. "This way, son," said Celeborn, standing outside of the water and holding a white robe. Harry climbed out and wrapped the robe around himself tightly. It wasn't like a normal bathrobe, but like a loose-fitting cloak. "We are making you new clothes that will fit you better," said Celeborn. "My Lady Galadriel would like to speak to you, and as would I, about King Minadbor." Harry stared, but slowly followed the elf. Sirius sat beside Harry's bed and brushed his godson's hair back. No word from Dumbledore, no word from anybody. Hagrid snored loudly on the other side of the bed. He had come to help keep vigil over Harry, and Sirius was happy for the added company. Out of curiosity, Sirius lifted Harry's eyelid. The milky whiteness was gone, and the sparkling green had returned. Sirius smiled warmly, closed the eyelid, and kissed it. "Now all that's left is you waking up," said Sirius, and healing from the... He lifted the sheets, but most of the wounds had mysteriously disappeared. There were still some of the wounds from the original incident, but they were now beginning to stop their assault on Harry's body and beginning to heal. "Please just come back," said Sirius, not knowing just how hard Harry was trying to get back home. Dumbledore made his way slowly through Castle Valor, keeping his wand at the ready just in case of anything. He had heard so many different stories about Castle Valor, some he considered rumors, but the rest, they just had to be stories. If the king was indeed gone, then perhaps he could go through the mythical library that was said to be in this castle. He could find a cure perhaps in one of those books. He could also try and find the celestial fountain. The waters in that blessed pool is supposed to have the healing powers of 1,000 phoenixes, an absolute cure-all. Then his mind strayed to the balance orb. If the balance was out of, how did the youngsters put it, out of whack, he could try and set it right. No, I must not touch that. I must not get near that, thought Dumbledore fiercely to himself. Harry, I must find a cure for Harry, at all costs. Harry, remember Harry. He climbed the stairs and looked slowly around the palace. He could hardly believe it. Though it had to have been uninhabited for almost over 3/4 of a century, no dust was gathering on any of the surfaces. He walked slowly onto the first landing, turned and continued upwards to the next one where the second floor was. He took one step on that staircase. Creak! Dumbledore froze, as if a sharp and painful shock went through his body. If someone was here and nearby, they were sure to have heard that. He was not disappointed. Suddenly he heard music. A faint but beautiful music. He couldn't pinpoint the instrument used. It was as if the music would change if he tried to discover its instrumental origin. His body moved against his will and followed the music. He knew following something that could possibly be a trap was the height of foolishness, but his body gave him little choice in the matter. He allowed his body to lead him up several flights of stairs that were not there before, down corridors that appeared out of nowhere but were decorated with the loveliest of paintings and statuettes. Dumbledore marveled at their beauty and wondered if these were the originals, and if all the museums in all the world possessed mere copies. His body stopped suddenly in the presence of a large golden door. The door had jewels decorating the edge of the door, 13 different stones, each going in the same pattern around the door. Dumbledore wanted to look and examine the stones on the door, but they were pulled out of his sight. The door opened towards him, and inside was a great and glorious throne room. Despite the gloom of storm outside, it didn't rob the room any of its beauty. The walls were covered with rich tapestries, and the room was lined with statues of several famous witches and wizards, Merlin, Morgan Le Fay, and countless others. Towards the back of the room, he saw his own. The music still continued as he walked slowly up to the throne. Since he had entered the throne room, he seemed to regain control of his body, so he walked up to his own statue. It was most flattering. He saw himself in a pose that he could no longer do at his age. His wand was raised and his knees bent, dueling an invisible foe, or so he thought was invisible. Dumbledore turned his head slightly and saw a sort of illusion of Gellert Grindelwald. Dumbledore looked around. He had the unyielding urge to examine each statue and see what illusion each would show him. Then he saw one statue that captured his eyes and drew it to him. He walked towards an ever-changing marble statue. A small baby boy with a scar on his forehead, a young boy flying a broomstick after a solid gold snitch, the same boy grabbing the face of a bald man with two faces, The same boy lying against a wall, with a fang sticking out of his arm, and a dead basilisk at his feet. The boy, a little older, casting a stag patronus, surrounded by hundreds of dementors. Then yet older still, a boy facing a dragon, and then the same boy dueling a cloaked figure. It was Harry. This statue was an ever-altering statue, not able to choose which form suited him perfectly. Dumbledore reached out to touch the statue's cheek of Harry dueling when the statue changed once more. This one Dumbledore could not place the origin. The pose was of him wielding a great sword and a bag of jewels in his hand. He heard a noise and looked towards the direction in which it came from, the throne. The throne was a tall, silver chair with fur over the sides to provide comfort to the seated monarch, though no one was seated on it at that moment. But the vacancy was not long-lasting. Very slowly, a ghostly shape solidified and lounged majestically on the throne. Dumbledore recognized the man from so many decades ago, though the man was now merely a specter. He didn't look as if he had aged a day. Instinctively, he kneeled before the king and bowed his head. "Who are you, and why have you invaded my castle?" asked the ghostly king, Minbanbar, the voice echoing off the walls of the room. Dumbledore looked up and stared at the ghost in shock. So close, he was so close to learning what was ailing his Harry. He must find out what it is. "I asked you a question, boy. I suggest you answer," said King Meandambor. Boy? He hadn't been referred to as that for over 100 years. But now was not the time to be debating his age and certification of adulthood. Dumbledore could tell the king was furious at being disturbed, and he could not blame him. "Forgive me, your majesty, I came to ask you for answers," said Dumbledore humbly. "Ask for answers? Well then, ask your questions, then be on your way out of my castle," said the king, waving his hand. Dismissively. "Many thanks, your majesty. You see, sire, I have a student under my care. He's been struck down with a strange and peculiar ailment. I was hoping that you could help me find a cure," said Dumbledore, his eyes pleading with the departed ruler for some sort of miracle cure. "Mysterious ailment? Tell me, Dumbledore, what are his symptoms?" said the king, leaning back in his chair. Dumbledore didn't bother asking him how he knew his name. Now was not the time. He glanced at the stot of himself and smirked at his own mindlessness. He was, however, overjoyed that the king had decided to help him. "We found him on the floor in Hogwarts, his body riddled with cuts and gashes. He has not woken up since we've then," said Dumbledore, still kneeling on the floor. The ghost leaned forward on his throne. "Has he developed any more injuries?" "Yes," said Dumbledore, excitedly. "The king must know what to do." "Yes, he has, but those go away after a short while. They seem to heal themselves without any help from us, but the original wounds are still present." The king looked thoughtful. "Describe the boy." "He's kind as a spring rain, gentle and innocent as a baby kitten, and yet brave as a tiger and fierce as a dragon guarding its lair," said Dumbledore proudly, completely forgetting that he could easily show the boy to the king as his statue was close by the throne. He hoped by telling the king what Harry was like would prompt the king to help him in any way he could. "Fascinating. Now, could you tell me what he looks like?" said the king with an amused smile. "Oh, of course. He's about, 5 feet 8 inches. No. Black hair," said Dumbledore. "And eyes as green as a shimmering emerald," said the king softly, looking over to the statue with a fond smile. "Yes, that is him," said Dumbledore. He said, looking over to the statue himself. Then he looked up quickly. "Is there anything we can do to wake him up?" "There is nothing you or anyone else in this world that can do anything," said the king. "This world?" asked Dumbledore. "What other world are you talking about?" "You needn't worry about that now. What you must be sure to do is protect the body the boy left behind," said the king. He stood up, and Dumbledore could almost feel the power radiating off the ghostly ruler. "I will take care of the other thing that needs to be protected." "What is that?" asked Dumbledore. "The means that sent the boy to where he resides," said the king. Dumbledore stood up and looked at the man with an uncertain look. "You mean to tell me that he's in 2 places at once?" "I will send you back to the fallen boy's side. You place your strongest guards around the boy," said King Meandambor. "I will see to his conscious form." "If I may, sir, is he your heir?" asked Dumbledore. He hoped to convince the man to leave his young charge be. Allow him to, if it all came out the way he hoped, live a life of peace and simple comfort. The comfort and peace he had be denied the boy's entire life. He was forced into a test. If he can pass my test, then yes, he will be considered. If not, then he might have learned something at least, said King Meandabor. Dumbledore stared, his hand itching towards his wand. Ghost or not, how could this man just do that? Dumbledore admitted that he caused Harry more trouble than Harry could ever deserve. Even if he were to be the devil incarnate, he wholeheartedly promised that Harry would no longer suffer by his hand, and that he would protect Harry with everything he had. You can put your wand away. I'm taking care not to have him killed, though he's holding his own on quite admirably, said the ghost, with a smirk. Can I help him in any way? Said Dumbledore. That other world you spoke of, may I join him? At this point, you might be more of a hindrance than a help, said the king. And from what I gather from the boy's thoughts, he would strike you on sight, he added with a smile. He would not kill you, of course, but he is not pleased with you at this moment. Harry followed the tall elf up the winding staircase, a staircase that wound around the tall tree. The forest was lit with an ethereal light that seemed to just enhance the beauty of woods. He heard music, not like the music that led him to each stone, but a sorrowful song. If Harry had to hazard a guess, it was a funeral dirge. What is that, they're singing? Asked Harry as he followed Celeborn up the stairs. A song for Gandalf, said Celeborn somberly. Would you like me to speak it in the common tongue? No, thanks. I don't think I could take it, said Harry, looking heartbroken. You were fond of him, said Celeborn. It wasn't a question, but an observation. Yes, sir. I didn't know him nearly as long as the hobbits or Strider, but I did really like him, like a grandfather. Celeborn stopped in his tracks. Do you not have one of your own? He asked without facing the young man following him. Not that I'm aware of, said Harry, shrugging. They must have died before I met them. Celeborn fell silent. Not to know the wisest of your family. Most unfortunate, but surely your children will benefit from your mother and father's wisdom. He continued upward the stairs. No, they won't. My parents are gone too, said Harry, continuing after the elf once more. Never knew what they were like personally. Celeborn stopped again, but this time he turned round and faced Harry with sorrowful eyes. It was a moment till he spoke again. They continued on in silence until they reached the end of the steps where there was a landing. Harry looked around and saw that it had several soft benches, a small fountain at one end, and a table of fruit beside it. There, sitting on one of the benches, was a beautiful blonde woman, tall and fair. Harry was strongly reminded of Arwen. This child is my Lady Galadriel, said Celeborn, walking over and sitting beside Galadriel. Harry bowed low, remembering what Strider told him to do if he should meet this woman. Astel has taught you well, said Galadriel with a smile. Come, sit with us. I want to hear all about you and your adventures. Harry looked at her eyes, but then looked down. Would you feel better, child, if we summoned Aragorn to sit with you? Asked Celeborn with a smile. Thank you, sir, but I'll be all right, said Harry, sitting down on a nearby bench. It took the rest of the day for Harry to tell his story to the two elvish monarchs. They only stopped him for clarification on some points, but not nearly as often as the hobbits and others at Rivendell had done. Harry had just finished speaking of the elf that tried to take his pouch when Lord Celeborn spoke again. Yes, we've heard of that, said Lord Celeborn. He has been reprimanded for trying to take that pouch when it was forewarned to us what you were carrying. You knew about the pouch, said Harry. Indeed. Word was sent to us from Rivendell, and Lady Galadriel told each of the wardens of the borders not to investigate in any pact that came their way by the Fellowship, said Lord Celeborn. But it seems that the temptation of curiosity was too great for some. Where is the pouch now? Asked Harry quickly. Aragorn has it, said Lady Galadriel. He swore he'd protect the pouch. Harry smiled softly. He would too. Now, child, what do you know about you, predecessor? Asked Lady Galadriel. My predecessor? Asked Harry confusedly. King Meandabor, said Lord Celeborn. He's not my predecessor, is he? Asked Harry. You are his chosen one. If you can hear the music that leads you to the stones, said Lord Celeborn. But he doesn't know who I am. He's been gone for over 1,000 years, hasn't he? Said Harry. You would be surprised what the spirits of the past can do, child, said Lord Celeborn. Harry pondered the words carefully. Predecessor, he didn't like the sound of that, but I don't think I'm really king material. I can barely keep myself out of trouble. I don't want to even think about me running a country. It's not just a country, this entire world, and from what I can tell, said Lord Celeborn with a kind smile, your world as well. You have got to be kidding me, thought Harry, shaking his head. I don't want to be king of anything. I just want to get home, he said out loud. Lord Celeborn and Lady Galadriel looked at each other in shock. I've got enough on my plate with Voldemort and trying to find these stones. I don't want to worry about a two worlds on top of that, said Harry, forgetting his manners. All he wanted was a nice, calm, normal life. Running the two worlds was on the list of things he didn't want. Dear child, said Lady Galadriel, we do not want you to do something you do not wish to do, but do not cast aside this path that lies ahead. It may be that someday you will wish to take the enchanted throne. Harry snarled down at the ground. Don't bet on that, said Harry. I've already been thrusted into a job I half-heartedly didn't want back home. I really don't want this one. Besides, said Harry angrily, where was my world when I was kicked around by my family? Their so-called boy who lived, who was declared a hero for something his mother did. Where was everyone when I needed them? They expect me to save them? Well, I want some equality here, shouted Harry loudly. Lady Galadriel's eyes were holding the faintest traces of tears. You've had a long 3 days, child. Would you like to rest a bit? We can take up this conversation another time, said Lord Celeborn. Rest easy, child. You will not be forced into a role that you do not wish. An unhappy ruler could soon become a tyrant. I am not saying that you will, he added swiftly. Lord Celeborn stood up as well. Lady Galadriel, Harry stood up right away and bowed low to the both of them, not wishing to disrespect them any further than he already did. I will show you to your chambers, said Lord Celeborn. Is it near where Strider and the rest of them are? Asked Harry. They rest at the forest floor near the fountains. You reside in the treetops, said Lord Celeborn. Why am I up there and they're down there? Asked Harry. You were in the process of healing, dear boy. And besides, my lady and I have taken a fondness to you, said Lord Celeborn. Your eyes, he said, lifting the long bangs out of Harry's eyes, are quite beautiful. It reminds us of our forest in springtime. Harry blushed slightly. Our fondness is why we have given you your own quarters. Do not worry. If you wish to see the rest of the fellowship, I will take you there. Tomorrow. Alas, tonight it may be best, if you rest. Harry yawned. He was exhausted, and just from his outburst. Your entire being agrees with my decision, said Lord Celeborn with a smile. Come, it's time that you rested once more. Harry got up the next day from his soft canopy bed and stretched his thin frame. He placed his hands behind his head and looked up at the morning sky that playfully shone through the openings in the ceiling. Why did he have to get thrown into stuff like this? If he wasn't supposed to be the great hero of the wizarding world and defeat Voldemort, he was now supposed to be king over that place. And this one, what he wouldn't give for a nice normal life. Go to school, get good marks, play Quidditch, go home to his loving family, and then do the process all over again. Not needing to worry about being killed by a psychopathic killer or tortured by a sadistic teacher, and now the workings for two whole frickin' worlds. Now he was supposed to play the role of king. He could think of several people that would do a better job than him. He thought of the Weasleys first. Mr. and Mrs. Weasley would make great rulers. Mr. Weasley would promote cooperation between the Muggle world and the Wizarding world. He could almost see it, flying cars everywhere, and everyone would be as fat as Uncle Vernon from all the food. He couldn't help but smile fondly. Hell, even their kids would become great rulers. Bill would be a really cool king. He certainly didn't know any other king that would have long hair, earring in one ear, and wore a leather jacket. Charlie would outlaw the use of dragon skin for gloves, boots, and jackets. Then he thought of the twins. The world would be fun, but maybe the world needed someone a bit more calm. Ron. Now that would be a world he would like. Just like Mrs. Weasley's world, everyone would get plenty to eat, but in his, the Chudley Cannon team would mostly likely be made the only team. Chess matches would decide arguments, and everyone would have some money. Ginny's world, Harry's eyes fell slightly. He didn't know what she would do. He really should, but he just couldn't fathom it. Apart from liking Quidditch and being as playful as her older brothers, he knew nothing else about her, which made him feel very guilty. When he got home, he'd make a point to know more about her. Then his thoughts dwelled on the third oldest Weasley, Percy. He had to admit the world would run like clockwork, but it would be boring. He also felt that perhaps he wouldn't be the best choice for a position of power. Percy seemed a bit power-hungry for the most part. His heart was in the right place, just not his brain. Then his mind strayed to Hermione. She'd make a great queen, the whole world would be full of intellectuals, and schools would be run to its highest efficiency. Like Mr. Weasley, there would be more cooperation between magical and non-magical folk. Not only that, but she'd finally succeed in freeing the house elves, though Harry wasn't sure that the house elves wouldn't be all that pleased about that little development. His mind traveled away from the Weasleys and Hermione and settled on a few others that would be great kings and queens beside him. Sirius, the whole world would be engulfed in flames, and not intentionally. Harry couldn't help but laugh. Nah, Sirius would be a good ruler, but that would never stop him from teasing him. Remus. Now there would the best choice. He was kind, smart, powerful, and knew about being an outcast. He would be the absolutely perfect king, perhaps. If he could wrangle it, he could have Remus be the king instead of him. He knew of one thing, one person that didn't deserve it or should never get it. Voldemort. He'd take the throne himself if the only available option was him. Harry sat up on his bed and began to change into the clothes that were laying down on the end of his bed. They were kind of like the outfit that Lord Celeborn wore last night. Rich garments of the finest make. He finished latching the pearl buttons when he saw someone coming into his room out of the corner of his eye. He turned and saw the same pair of elves that had knocked him out on the way to Lothlórien. Harry reached beside him and withdrew his sword quickly. Relax, child. They're only here to say something to you, said Lord Celeborn's voice. Speak, you two, he added sternly. We apologize for striking you, said the one elf solemnly. We had no cause to do so. Harry did not lower his sword. That's all you can expect and deserve. Leave us, said Lord Celeborn. The two elves left the room, but one didn't leave without sending Harry a glare, but he left with no physical altercation. You surprised me, child. I did not expect you take up a sword so readily, said Lord Celeborn. He had the faintest of smiles on his lips. I don't like being smacked around, muttered Harry. I did not hear you, dearest child, said Lord Celeborn kindly. I don't take kindly to being struck, said Harry clearly. Lord Celeborn smiled. I recollect that you stated something last night about wishing to see the rest of your company. Harry sheathed his sword quickly and hurried after Lord Celeborn. Harry followed him down the circular steps of the giant tree Harry had slept in last night. The early morning sunshine shone softly down to the forest floor and made the dewdrops that still clung desperately to the leaves sparkle and shine. Lord Celeborn led him down to the lowest part of Lothlórien, where the air was cool and comfortable. There was a small trickling waterfall coming down a small rock wall and poured its contents into a small pool and cups so people could drink the water. Harry looked around the area and saw little holes in the base of the trees. There were cushions and blankets inside, and they looked as if they had been slept in. Harry followed Lord Celeborn a little further and saw the rest of the fellowship sitting around, taking in the beauty of the woods. Boromir was not, however. He was obviously agitated by something. Harry, said Pippin eagerly. He ran over to the youth, with Merry following close behind. Blimey, you've been gone a long time. Harry stared at Pippin. I've been hanging around you too long. You're using words that I use back home. Pippin smiled broadly. Are you all right? Asked Merry. Just fine now, said Harry. Hey, your eye is all better, said Pippin. How did they heal it so quick? Thank you, Lord Celeborn, said Legolas, bowing low. He knew he had the Lord of Lothlórien to thank for that. Quite welcome, young Legolas, said Celeborn with a smile. We are quite fortunate his body could allow the best healing skills we have. Strider came walking up to Harry and placed in his hands the pouch. They're all there, said Strider. Thanks, said Harry with a grateful smile. He opened the pouch and looked at them. He still didn't want to be ruler of anything, but he had to get home. Hopefully he didn't have to take the throne in order to get home. And if he did, well, he hoped it wouldn't come to that. Dumbledore followed the spirit down to the deepest part of the castle. They passed tapestries and busts of ancient craft. His thoughts barely strayed from the image of his fallen student. They continued down the corridors until they came to a large oak door. The king waved his ghostly hand in front of the door. The door opened slowly and revealed a shimmering pillar of light. The rest of the room was dark, almost non-existent. The pillar just continued down the shaft into the nothingness. What on earth is this? Said Dumbledore in shock. This is the magical core. A sliver of this goes into each wizard, witch, and magical creature with every new birth of a magical being, A minuscule amount goes to the infant and enables them to utilize their magic. Once they pass away beyond the land of the living, the sliver of light comes back to the core, said the king with a smile. It's beautiful, said Dumbledore with a rapturous look. I can feel something deep within me, wishing to just leap into the light. I wouldn't recommend it, not unless you are willing to wait several years to use magic again. It would take your Harry several years to just find your light in that pillar, said the king. Harry? Asked Dumbledore. If he becomes the next ruler, then he would be the only able to take the pieces of core out at will, said the king. But what if Harry doesn't want to be king? I know Harry, he won't just leap at that job, said Dumbledore. If he doesn't, then I need to take a closer look at other people. But that boy seems to be a wonderful candidate, said King with a smile. But then the smile faltered. It took me this long to find the boy, and that was by a happy and horrible accident. The king waved his arm again, and an image appeared, swirling amongst the light. It was grim old place. I assume this is where the boy is hiding, said the king. Yes, sir, said Dumbledore. Well, step through the light, it will take you right to the boy, said the king with a smile. But won't my magic be, said Dumbledore. Only if I do not give my blessing, said King Minenbe. Now go. I will reflect on the events and see what I can do. Dumbledore took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and stepped through the shaft of light. It felt warm and yet cold all at the same time. When he opened them, he found himself in the room which Harry occupied, with two very shocked guards stationed beside the boy. Dumbledore! Where? How? Asked Sirius, stuttering loudly. I met him. I saw him, said Dumbledore, sinking into a chair. For the entire time that he had been in Castle Valor, he hadn't rested for a moment. He had been graciously given the grand tour of the castle, and the rumors, they were true, and severely watered down. Did he give you a cure for Harry? Asked Sirius eagerly. There isn't one, said Dumbledore. Sirius turned pale and felt his stomach plummet right into his shoes. No cure, but there had to be. He couldn't let his godson, his precious, wonderful boy, go through life like this, constantly wounded from unknown weapons and just lying there. There is no cure, but, said Dumbledore. But what? Said Sirius quickly. But he said that Harry will wake up on his own, said Dumbledore. He said something about Harry being in another world. Another world? What the hell is that supposed to mean? Asked Sirius. Hagrid was stunned beyond words. There is another world that King Minenbe rules alongside this one, said Dumbledore. Hope it's full of fluffy bunnies and pink clouds, said Sirius, running his hand down his clammy face. Not if Harry looks like that, it ain't, said Hagrid, looking at Harry with a sorrowful look. There's a plus side. He's looking a lot healthier than he has in a while, said Dumbledore, taking in Harry's face. How's his eye? It cleared up, all on its own. I swear, I'm about a gnome throw away from losing my mind, said Sirius. Come with me, Sirius, said Dumbledore, extending his hand. I don't want to leave, said Sirius, grasping Harry's hand. Hagrid will guard him, said Dumbledore with a smile. If there is one thing I am certain of, it's that Hagrid will not allow anyone to even get close enough to Harry to give him a cold. That I will, said Hagrid proudly. Sirius slowly stood up and followed Dumbledore out of the room. They traveled down the stairs and met up with the Weasley children and Hermione. When did you get back, sir? Asked Ron in shock. Did you find Castle Valor? Asked Ginny. Did you find a way to wake up Harry? Asked Hermione. What did the king say? Said Fred. What was he like? Asked George. I will tell you all at another time, but now Sirius and I need to talk, said Dumbledore, placing a hand on Sirius's shoulder. Dumbledore took his wand out of his pocket and tapped Sirius smartly on the head with it. What the? Asked Sirius. He backed up into a mirror, turned, and saw his entire being changed. His long black hair was now a bright blonde, his gray eyes were transformed to a shimmering blue, and his face was shortened in places and elongated in others. I look horrible, said Sirius, examining himself closely, not too fond of the nose. You only have to live with it for a short while. I thought you and I would take a stroll and talk, said Dumbledore. Sirius sent a quick look up in the direction of his godson's room. We'll be fine, but I felt that you, of all people, should know the complete facts first, said Dumbledore. He took Sirius by the arm and led him outside, but Sirius froze at the door. Come accompany an old man on a walk, said Dumbledore gently. Sirius took a tentative step out the door and out into the street. They walked for over an hour. Dumbledore relayed everything that the king had shared with him. So, what's this other world like? Asked Sirius. From what the king told me, it's not the fluffy, happy place you hope for, said Dumbledore. That was just a desperate dream, said Sirius. Dumbledore smiled softly. The king told me that this world is almost a copy of our medieval times, though some of the creatures there are nothing like our own. What do you mean? Asked Sirius. Well, elves, for instance. They look nothing like ours. The way he described them reminded me of Velas, to be honest, said Dumbledore, walking towards a man pushing a food cart. Care for something? Sirius shrugged. 2 bags of peanuts, please, said Dumbledore with a bright smile as he took out some muggle money. He heats these things in his cart? Asked Sirius as they walked away. You would be amazed what these folks can do, said Dumbledore with a smile. But back to the other world, there is another group of creatures that both places have that are nothing alike. I'm betting werewolves, said Sirius as he cracked a few peanuts out of their shells. Not really. I don't believe there are any werewolves, actually. It's the goblins that are not the same, said Dumbledore thoughtfully. They beautiful too? Asked Sirius with a sneer. His mood was lifting immensely since he was taken outside. His mind stayed on Harry, but being outside helped soothe his mind back to where it was before all this insanity. Far from it, they're cruel, vicious, horrifying, and deadly. I fear that perhaps Harry is attracting some of those scars from goblins, said Dumbledore. How the hell is that possible? He's sleeping in a bed at home, said Sirius. That's what throws me as well. According to what I've learned at Castle Valor, seems that Harry is operating in 2 different worlds, said Dumbledore, cracking the shell of his peanut very carefully. How the hell is that possible? Asked Sirius. I don't know, but from what I can guess, it seems that Harry's consciousness and perhaps a bit of his core went with him over to that world, said Dumbledore. But how did you get there in the first place? He was in Hogwarts, said Sirius frantically. I don't know, but the king has reassured me that he himself would keep an eye on whatever sent Harry to that world, said Dumbledore softly. But he wouldn't tell you what it was, said Sirius. I think that I must keep up with the youngster's slang shoe is on the other foot, said Dumbledore. That's not recent slang, said Sirius. Recent to me, said Dumbledore. But now I know why Harry always had that look of disappointment whenever he and I would have a chat. He knew I was withholding information. Seems I'm going through the same thing now, he added with a faint smile. Are we sure he's acting on Harry's best interest? Asked Sirius. I believe so. He wants Harry to take his place on the throne, said Dumbledore. You won't take it, said Sirius with a chuckle. If I know my own cub, I told him that if Harry refuses the crown, then he must look again for another heir. From what I gather, the king holds him in top contention. He will only look elsewhere if Harry is definite about his choice, said Dumbledore with a smile. Is he hoping to sway Harry to his side? Asked Sirius. I believe so. I don't know how, but I think he will try. All I know is that I want Harry back in this world. Said Dumbledore sadly. Apologize, helped Sirius. Beg him to forgive me, said Dumbledore, though I know I do not deserve it. Sirius patted the old man's back. You're earning the right to act. Dumbledore looked at his old student with misty eyes. Deep in the Hogwarts dungeons, there were 2 dark figures stationed beside a gory-looking painting huddled in the darkest corner. It was the exact same painting that Umbridge had banished Harry through a few months ago. Luckily for the students, they never had cause to travel down that way. For the 2 figures were far from benevolent. They had been stationed in that corridor since the day before the death of Dolores. Umbridge. They wore invisibility cloaks to hide from the teachers that could actually deal some massive damage onto them, and remained absolutely silent when sensory wards told them someone was coming. The Dark Lord told them that they had to guard that particular painting with their lives, and when the Dark Lord says that, get ready for no sleep, no regular meals, and possibly to lose your life. One of the masked men looked at the painting. While he looked at it, the face behind the mask paled. He was one of the newest members. He joined for the chance at Granger and the even bigger chance of getting rich. What's with you? Asked the other Death Eater. He was a seasoned Death Eater. He wasn't one of the founding members or even a leader, but he knew his place and especially knew when to shut up and do what his master told him to. This picture gives me the creeps, said the masked Death Eater. It's all covered in blood. The other Death Eater rolled his eyes. Why did he have to get the newer ones that didn't have the brains to fit in a pixie? Why do we need to guard this picture anyway? Asked the nervous Death Eater. What's so special about it? The Dark Lord wants it guarded. That's all we need to know, said the Death Eater sternly. Best get that lesson through the young man's head before it got cut clean off by Bellatrix. The Death Eater looked at the painting again, focusing mainly on one face in particular. You know what I think? I don't care what you think, said the Death Eater with a groan. I think Potter is stuck in that painting, said the Death Eater in awe. That got his attention. He turned his head quickly. What? The other Death Eater looked at the painting as well. He saw the face that his comrade was gazing at. It must just be a coincidence. It's got a scar and everything, said the Death Eater. How can that be a coincidence? This painting looks a lot older than even the school. The stern Death Eater turned to face the painting even closer. He placed his face very close to the oils to inspect it further when a bright flash of light blasted down from the ceiling. The Death Eaters were completely engulfed in the light. Their vision was blinded by the brilliant, tiny, sharp slivers of light that came raining down out of the ceiling. Both of the masked men screamed in agony and they disappeared completely. The light faded away slowly, and in its place was the form of King Nindibor. He walked slowly up to the painting and looked at one of the oil-painted visages. Well, lad, I hope that you survive the battles that are to come. I can only help you so much, said the king. The rest is up to you. He blew on his hands with his ghostly breath. The air seemed to shimmer around his ghostly palms and fingers. The king's hands began to turn pink and developed a texture as if the king's breath was the breath of life itself. He reached up and took the painting down gently. The light that had destroyed the two Death Eaters and left him behind came back again and collected both the king and the painting. Harry sat with the Fellowship underneath the protection of the Lothlórien forest. A short while after Harry came to sit with them, he fell into silence once again. Are you feeling all right, Harry? Asked Sam. I'm okay now, said Harry with a smile. They could still hear the faint traces of the song that the elves were singing for Gandalf on the breeze. Do you know a song for Gandalf? Asked Pippin sadly. Like the one you sang in Bree. Harry looked down quickly. Said Harry softly. He loved your singing voice back in Rivendell, said Strider. He would like you to sing again. Harry closed his eyes, picked the song that he heard Mrs. Fig sing one time when one of her favorite cats died. Gandalf wasn't a cat, but in his opinion the words did fit the situation. He sang, Elves began to walk slowly towards the glade they sat in, and stand beside Celeborn. Even Galadriel walked softly over to stand beside her husband. His talents know no bounds, it seems, said the Lord of Lothlórien. When Harry was done singing, Lord Celeborn walked up behind the youth. What was the title of that song? Goodbye, my friend, said Harry quietly. Though I didn't know him all that long, he added, even softly. It was a beautiful song, said Lady Galadriel softly. She looked at her husband and nodded. We wish to speak with you again, son. Today, we promise to take things a little slower, said Lord Celeborn with a soft smile. Harry didn't really want to leave his friends, but he stood up anyway and followed the two leaders of Lothlórien to the same room they had been in the night prior. He needed to apologize for the way he acted. Sirius and Dumbledore climbed the stairs back to where Harry laid, but not before they took the glamour charm off Sirius. It would not do for Hagrid to see a stranger and so close to Harry, unless Sirius wanted to be thrown from the second floor and through the first floor until he struck the basement below. So how long will this test of the King's take? Asked Sirius. I don't know, I can only hope that the test is almost done, or at least half done, said Dumbledore. They entered the room, finding Hagrid tucking Harry in. Everything all right, Hagrid? Asked Sirius, throwing his coat over the back of his armchair. Nothing's happened, said Hagrid. The kids came in and spoke to him a bit. He probably heard them, said Sirius softly. Dumbledore caught Sirius's eyes and sent him a small smile. Ron's owl came in and tried to get under the covers. Hedwig chased him out, so I'm fixing the blankets, said Hagrid with a smile. Don't quite know why he tried that, but Hedwig wasn't having none of that. You know, I never really noticed, but she hasn't really left this room either, said Sirius, looking up at the wardrobe, where Hedwig had been and still was keeping her constant vigil. I know why you said that, said Dumbledore, taking his cloak off after Hagrid left to get something to eat. Best not to worry them as well. It's easier if I'm the only one going crazy, said Sirius, sinking into his own chair. Don't forget me, said Dumbledore, pulling up his armchair. Sirius took a phial of blood replenishing and poured it gently down Harry's throat. These are clearing up nicely, so I don't think we'll be needing any more of these, unless he gets hurt again. I'll keep an eye on Harry, as long as he needs me to, said Sirius, but I won't stop praying that he'll wake up sooner. No one else will stop doing so either, said Dumbledore, patting Sirius's back. Harry sat in the seat that he had sat in the night before and leaned back into the cushioned backrest of the chair. Let's take this conversation in a different direction than we did last night. I do not wish to distress you again. Yeah, about that, I'm sorry, said Harry sincerely. Lord Celeborn smiled. Don't worry, child. We can understand your anxiety. Hopefully future discussions will not cause you further distress. We will focus today on King Miandinbor himself, said Galadriel kindly. If we begin to make you uncomfortable again, please let us know. Tell us, child, what has Lord Elrond and Mithrandir told you? Asked Lord Celeborn.
Harry rubbed the back of his head, just that he was a really kind man and that he was killed on his birthday.
I'm sure someone elaborated a bit on that, said Lord Celeborn with a kind smile. I don't remember it all, word for word, said Harry with a blush. Well, let's discuss the king a bit further then, said Lady Galadriel. Harry sat in silence and took in Lord Celeborn's words, though something was wrong with what Lord Celeborn was saying. We shall begin at the beginning. It is not certain from which world King Miandinbor called his true home. He only came to be widely in Middle-earth when this world was in utter turmoil. There were no real leaders, kings or lords, to govern the men who were starting to mass populate the world. The men fought over who was right and who was wrong, who owned what land or what beast of burden. We the elves and also the dwarves had lords and kings, but the race of men would not pay heed to our leaders. They would prefer listen to the wizards. We did not mind, as long as the fighting was brought to a standstill, for it would often happen that the fighting would stray into elvish and dwarvish territory. Gandalf himself was still an inexperienced wizard in those days, trying his hardest to learn all he could from his first master, Saruman. Saruman tried teaching the young Gandalf how to harness the elemental powers of their staffs. When another wizard came to Middle-earth, a wizard that took over the tutorage of Gandalf. He was a wizard of the likes no one had ever heard of before. He carried no staff, no wand, but he did wear a crown upon his head. Each pinnacle of the crown carried a brilliant jewel on it. I believe the jewels in that pouch you carry are one and the same. Where did he get the crown? Asked Harry. He thought the people of Middle-earth made him that, and Middle-earth was where he got the jewels. This wasn't adding up with what Elrond told him. We do not know, dear child. It could have been from your world, or it could have been from the Valar, said Galadriel kindly, though magic of that sort does not happen just out of luck. So did they crown him king? Asked Harry. The race of men called him king first, most likely because of the crown on his head. He told the people that he wasn't truly a king of this world, merely a visitor. So perhaps he did come from your world. But then again, he could have been just deceiving the men to protect his homeland. He only came to help this world get back on the path of destiny, though it is unknown who summoned him. But he became beloved by all, and they happily proclaimed him king of the entirety of Middle-earth. With him as their ruler, the fighting ceased over the course of a few months. The little land that people actually needed was assigned to them. The goblins and trolls were kept to their mountains, and away from harming the neighboring farmers or travelers, the dragons were kept to the uninhabited mountaintops. He gave aid to the ancient and twives as they cared for the vast woodlands that cradled this world. They of all creatures seemed to earn his favor, as he enchanted many of their forests in order to protect them against fire and witchcraft. Middle-earth experienced many decades of peace and prosperity under his rule, but that lengthy reign was cut short by the Dark Lord Sauron and his master, said Lord Celeborn somberly. What did he ever do to them? Said Harry. If he was so beloved, what did he do to cross them? It was the fact that they wanted his jewels for their own purposes, for no one could best King Miandinbor in the ways of magical skill. With those jewels, the forces of evil would cover the land of Middle-earth and beyond in darkness, said Lord Celeborn. They tried to get their tainted hands on them, but they never got 'em, said Harry, gripping the pouch tightly. No, they never did, but the Dark Lord Sauron did get another weapon, said Lady Galadriel. She touched the beautiful ring on her finger. If the Dark Lords were that powerful to beat King Miandinbor, how did Elrond get his body? Asked Harry quietly. They cast his body out of his home, now known as Mordor, and left it for the beasts to do what they wanted with it. Elrond took the body to Rivendell, for King Miandinbor loved Elrond's home. Above any other elf kingdom, he rests there to this day, till he may rest back in Mordor. Harry looked confused. Something wrong, dear child? Asked Lady Galadriel. This sort of doesn't sound like what Gandalf and Elrond told Strider and I, said Harry. Some of it matched, but not all of it. It was Lord Celeborn's turn to look confused. He looked at his wife, Lady Galadriel, who merely smiled. It seems that the story of King Miandinbor has taken the rank of legend, for it has been over 2,000 years since stories had been fact, said Lord Celeborn with a slight smile. and perhaps the facts have been distorted slightly. Guess I'll have to find a way to ask him what happened. Chances of that is slim to none, said Harry. That remains to be seen, said Lady Galadriel. Harry looked up to the both of them. They've been really nice, and I shouted at them yesterday. I need to come up with some way to make it up to them, thought Harry to himself. So, in order to take the throne, what do you have to do? Asked Harry. Are you sure you want to ask that? Remember last night, said Lord Celeborn gently. I'm just curious, said Harry. Curiosity, the finder of adventure, said Lord Celeborn with a kind smile. I don't know how you would become king, for he was our first. I suppose finding all the jewels and then helping Aragorn defeat the Dark Lord Sauron would do it. But maybe, because there are kings of men already, that having a king like King Miandinbor again might not be beneficial anymore, said Harry. Lord Celeborn laughed. A wise child at such a young age. It is true that the need is gone, but another protector is always welcomed. The mountain passes and roads from kingdom to kingdom needs repair and wards to protect them from unruly villains. So pretty much just gardener and guard duty? Well, that doesn't sound all that hard, said Harry, but I don't know a fraction of the magic he did. Lord Celeborn stroked his chin slightly. Perhaps there will be a teacher in this world for you to learn from. In the meantime, that is all we have to tell you. That will not confuse you further. Is there something you would like to do? You don't have a kitchen, do you? Asked Harry. Of course. Alas, you haven't eaten in a while. It is no great wonder you are famished, said Lord Celeborn, standing up. Haldir, please take this young one to the kitchens and let him eat his fill. Yes, my lord, said Haldir, bowing low and leading Harry out of the room. Lord Celeborn sat down beside his wife. Such a dear thing, said Lady Galadriel. It is not often that the race of men can produce a child like that. I was quite embarrassed to think that our knowledge of King Not and Denbar might be incorrect, said Lord Celeborn. If only the curse would be lifted off his name, so we may write his life story down. The Dark Lord's curse of forgetfulness is coming at last to the elves, it seems, said Lady Galadriel sadly. Even we are forgetting the happier times of our long history. Voldemort was not happy. His Death Eaters, wherever they ran away to, lost the painting. The Potter Boy was nowhere to be seen, and now the painting was gone. If he ever got a hold of the two Death Eaters that were supposed to be guarding the painting, they would wish they shared the same fate as that Umbridge woman. The rest of his Death Eaters knew to stay far away from the Dark Lord at this point. Not even Bellatrix, who had just been broken out of Azkaban, was safe from her master's rage. Lucius and his wife barricaded themselves in their son's bedroom, hoping their Dark Master would not find them there. He decided that if he couldn't have the painting, he'd find the boy, and Merlin helped the people sheltering him